Chapter 506. Conrad, you can leave the hospital now. In the ward of Boston's Massachusetts General Hospital, a nurse spoke in a sharp voice to the big man who was packing up. This hospital was famous. There were only 3 famous hospitals in Boston. Of course, some small clinics or private hospitals were not included in this list. The 3 most famous ones were Massachusetts General Hospital, Dana-Farber Cancer Center, and Boston Children's Hospital. Among them, Massachusetts General Hospital was the second most comprehensive hospital in the United States. Dana-Farber Cancer Center was the 4th most specialized cancer hospital in the United States. Boston Children's Hospital was the top pediatric hospital in the United States. Of course, this ranking was there for all to see. The prices of the healers were also quite famous. "Oh, thank you." Hearing the nurse's words, the big man who was packing up said in a low voice, "Papaya." Looking at the guy's appearance, the nurse couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. Then she swayed her big butt and left. The hospital was just like the entertainment industry. Sometimes it was really hard to see the light, especially when it came to private life. Of course, this was not absolute. There were good people everywhere, but bad people still accounted for the majority. It was the same in the hospital. In the domestic medical system, private life was very messy. It was even more so in foreign hospitals. The United States was a very open country. Thinking about the contents of so many FBI warnings, which were all related to hospitals, it could be roughly understood. Although Massachusetts General Hospital was the second best hospital in the United States, the nurses here were obviously unwilling to be left out. Conrad was more than 2 meters tall and had a body full of muscles. He was treated with the best medicine and lived in the best room. Naturally, he was targeted by many female nurses. However, this guy seemed to be born without love for women. He didn't seem to understand the explicit hints of these women and kept playing dumb. At first, these female nurses were very patient, but later, their attitudes slowly changed. They either ignored him or acted like they did just now. However, these attitudes couldn't change his character. His character was like this. Conrad took his things and left the hospital. As soon as he walked to the door, he saw a police car parked there. "Get in the car." Looking at the police car in front of him, Conrad was a little hesitant. In the end, he went around it and prepared to leave, but the person sitting in the car didn't let him go. Instead, he took the initiative to open the door of the passenger seat and said to him. Hearing this person's words, Conrad couldn't help but glance at this guy. He hesitated for a while before getting into the car. "Where are you going?" "I'll give you a ride." Watching Conrad get in the car, the driver said with a smile. If Zhang Hai were here, he would definitely recognize this person. He had met this person before. This person was called Doyle George. When the Grey Gang in Boston attacked him, this guy had fought side by side with him. However, it was just as Zhang Hai thought. This guy was a gold-plated person, relying on the heroic battle he had fought in the past. He was then transferred back to Boston and became a sheriff. The United States was different from Huaxia. There was no division chief or section chief in the police department. The police ranks here were only divided into police officer, sergeant, superintendent, sheriff, superintendent, and other positions. Of course, each state had different laws, and naturally the names were different but the meaning was similar. The position of a sheriff was basically the same as the power of the director of some domestic police stations. If it was in a big city like Boston, it would be similar to the power of the director of a local police station. This also proved how strong Doyle George was. Of course, it referred to the strength of his family. As for him and Conrad, it was mainly because of the battle with Zhang Hai. In that battle, Conrad was shot many times. After a simple treatment by Bernice, he was sent to the hospital. Doyle George also went to the hospital and happened to know this guy. After knowing that he had betrayed Zhang Hai at the last moment, and that was why Conrad's men didn't become hostages, Doyle became interested in him. Gradually, he came to see Conrad. After the two met a few times, not only did they become friends, but they were also very close to each other. Of course, the money for Conrad's treatment was paid for by Zhang Hai. He didn't care about the tens of thousands of dollars, but Doyle George helped him get discharged from the hospital. He also knew about this guy's history. He used to be an underground boxer, which made him want to recruit him into his police force. This was also one of the reasons why he was here. "Thank you." Hearing Doyle George's words, Conrad didn't say the specific location, but just said in a muffled voice, "You don't have to thank me. You don't have to thank me. It was Zhang Hai who paid you, but you still have to be careful in the future. You can't just trust anyone." Hearing his words, Doyle, who had been with him for a long time, naturally knew what he meant. He smiled and said, "Zhang Hai, benefactor, please take me to Zhang Hai." Hearing his words, Conrad was stunned for a moment, then his gaze became more determined. He originally came to Boston to look for Zhang Hai, but due to a freak combination of factors, he became Zhang Hai's enemy and entered the Grey Gang, almost killing Zhang Hai. And Zhang Hai actually paid for his treatment. In his opinion, he owed Zhang Hai 2 lives. Upon hearing his words, Doyle couldn't help but chuckle helplessly. However, he knew that this was Conson's habit, so he didn't say much. Instead, he turned the steering wheel and drove towards Winthrop's position. As for Zhang Hai's home in Winthrop, the atmosphere was a bit solemn. Of course, the main solemn ones were Zhang Hai and Bernice. The other 3 were just implicated. "I found that you've been getting more and more out of control recently. Are you infected with some rich boy's habits? Can't you just stay at home for a few days? You've only been out for half a month, and you've only been back for 3 days, and now you're leaving again?" Looking at Zhang Hai, who was eating steak, Bernice put down the knife and fork in her hand and said with a frown, "Haha, this time I'm really going to discuss business. I'll be back in 3 days at most, at least 2 days." Hearing Bernice's words, Zhang Hai also smiled. In fact, to be honest, if it weren't for the billion, he would be too lazy to go. People who were familiar with Zhang Hai knew that this person was actually very lazy. He liked the kind of monotonous life. He had no interest in the pursuit of excitement, the pursuit of individuality, the search for the warmest place in his heart, and the like. He was not a rich young man, nor was he an artistic young man. His artistic style was not that heavy. Zhang Hai could be summarized as greedy, lecherous, afraid of death, selfish, aggressive, unsympathetic, and without any ideals. It could be said that he was just the most ordinary person among all living beings. With great power came great responsibility. What benefiting the world, what making the earth evolve and advance, what the hell? He was not interested at all. He just wanted to make himself more comfortable, safer, and more enjoyable. This was his purpose. Of course, he also had a bottom line. Other than that, he was just an ordinary young man in society. He was not a genius, he had no ambition, and from the beginning to the end, he did not have any clear goals. Therefore, his sense of immersion was quite strong. The only difference was that he had a Dragon Ball in his body, that was all. Other than that, he was no different from an ordinary young man. People were afraid of losing. In the past, Zhang Hai did not have anything to lose. The only thing he could lose was his life. Therefore, even ants would drag out their lives, let alone Zhang Hai. Therefore, in the past, Zhang Hai was also afraid of death. However, he estimated that no one would harm him, and now he was also afraid of death, because others had a reason to harm him. His manner, his money, and his identity were all extremely sensitive. Therefore, in addition to bringing bodyguards, he also needed some official things to protect himself. He would speak according to the country he was in. If he was in China, the best way to protect himself would be to contact the higher-ups and make friends with some second-generation officials or third-generation officials. Naturally, he would be able to live a good life. But in the United States, being a government official was useless because the Americans didn't care about government officials at all. If you wanted to survive in the United States, the most important thing was money. In this capitalist society, only money was recognized, not people. Most importantly, just having money wasn't enough because there were people who were richer than you. You had to have something that could save your life, such as oil futures. This was also one of the reasons why Zhang Hai was so careful. He was afraid of death, it was that simple. Forget it, I can't control you. You don't have to explain to me. I am not related to you. You can do as you see fit. She didn't know why, but when Bernice heard that Zhang Hai was going to leave, she couldn't help but feel annoyed. But on second thought, what was there to be annoyed about? She was not related to him, so what was there to be annoyed about? So after hesitating for a moment, she said directly, then lowered her head to eat the steak in front of her. Seeing that she did not speak, Zhang Hai also glanced at her carefully. He muttered in his heart, is this girl on her period? Why is she so impulsive? When she heard that I was leaving, it was as if she wanted to eat me. Is there a mistake? Just as Zhang Hai was muttering there, the doorbell outside rang. Chapter 507. Hearing the doorbell, Zhang Hai was stunned. He walked to the door and picked it up. There were two people standing outside the door. Zhang Hai was familiar with them. One was Doyle George. After all, he had fought side by side with Zhang Hai. After that incident, Doyle was transferred to the Boston Police Department and became a sheriff. He was directly promoted with seniority. It seemed that his family was at least very powerful in the police field. Zhang Hai also had some impression of the other person. He was a big guy. Zhang Hai had seen him 3 times. The first time was in an underground boxing match in Miami. At that time, he beat someone to death and was seriously injured. The second time was on the streets of Miami. He found him interesting, so he invited him to eat a hamburger. At the same time there was a car accident. Of course, 70% of the treatment fee for this big guy was paid by Zhang Heng. The 4 girls who hit him didn't have much money. Their families could only pay for the basic treatment. The follow-up healthcare and other expenses, such as the treatment of his original internal injuries, were all paid by Zhang Hai. The third time they met was in his villa. This guy was Zhang Hai's enemy, but for some reason, he betrayed him at the last moment. He saved Delina and the others, giving them time to release Azalina and deal with the invaders. Then he was sent to the hospital. Although Zhang Hai couldn't wait to kill all those who invaded his home, this guy helped him a lot. But after all, this guy had helped him, so Zhang Hai didn't find trouble with him. Instead, he cured him. But now, seeing them come, Zhang Hai was a little confused. What are they doing here? Are they thanking me? This was the most likely reason, but Zhang Hai really didn't know the specifics. Hey Doyle, how come you have time to come here? Looking at the 2 people on the other side of the phone, since he couldn't figure it out, he might as well ask directly. Zhang Hai wasn't the kind of person who liked to keep things to himself. Hey man, you're right. I'm very busy. This time I'm mainly here to accompany this big guy. Open the door first, let's go in and talk. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Doyle George said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai didn't doubt him. He opened the door directly and waited for the 2 in front of the villa. After the door was opened, the 2 returned to the car and then drove into Zhang Hai's manor. After parking the car in the parking lot, the 2 also walked out. Looking at Zhang Hai standing at the door, Conrad couldn't help trembling. He had spent a lot of effort to find Zhang Hai, but fortunately, he finally found him. Come in. Benefactor. Seeing the 2 coming, Zhang Hai also took a few steps forward and greeted the 2 of them, but before he finished speaking, Conrad had already taken a few big steps to the front of the villa, knelt in front of Zhang Hai, and kowtowed heavily to Zhang Hai. After all, this is a concrete floor. As soon as his head touched the ground, it made a banging sound, but Zhang Hai was startled. He immediately jumped down and supported Connerson Peters, who was still kowtowing. What's going on? He didn't understand. Benefactor, do you still remember me? I heard that in Huaxia, you have to express your gratitude in this way. Looking at Zhang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. Although his brain is not working properly, he is not stupid, at least he can still speak clearly. You don't have to do this. Really, get up quickly. Zhang Hai couldn't help but smile when he felt this guy's immense strength and wanted to kowtow. He had to admit that this guy's strength was quite strong. Judging from Zhang Hai's actions, this guy's strength should be very close to the limit of human strength. But compared to Zhang Hai, he was still far from Zhang Hai's strength, which was 4 times the limit of human strength. Therefore, under Conrad's surprised gaze, Zhang Hai directly lifted him up, which made Conrad extremely surprised. He had never experienced someone being able to lift him up directly in his life. At this moment, he looked at Zhang Hai with a burning gaze. He only admired one kind of person in his life, and that was those who were stronger than him. Zhang Hai had saved his life and was stronger than him. Thinking of this, in Conrad's simple heart, Zhang Hai had already become his benefactor and an object of worship. Who the hell is this? He's so heavy, how can you lift him up? I'm really starting to doubt your genes, brother. Are you a humanoid Tyrannosaurus Rex? Or an alien? Say, what are you doing on Earth? Are you preparing to invade Earth? Seeing Jiang Hai actually lifting Conrad up, Doyle George, who was walking over, could not help but be stunned for a moment. Then he said in surprise, "Fa, the purpose of my visit to Earth is to settle things with your sister." After helping Conrad stand up, Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at Doyle. After spitting out the word F, he looked at Doyle and said in a mocking tone, "Unfortunately, I don't have a sister. If I did, I would definitely let her marry you. Being targeted by a billionaire, such a wonderful thing must be a great thing for her." Unfortunately, in an open country like the United States, such jokes were not taken seriously by the Americans. Instead, Doyle used this sentence to make fun of him. "I can't be bothered with you. Let's go in first." Ignoring this guy's sultry look, Jiang Hai waved his hand and led the two into his villa. But the moment Conrad stepped into the villa, Azalina, who was cutting the steak, Little Huang and Xiao Bai, who were playing in the distance, as well as Dai and Chirpy, were all shocked. They looked at Conrad with vigilant expressions. In particular, Little Huang and Xiao Bai were no longer playing. Instead, they slowly leaned over and stared at Conrad with a pair of wolf-like eyes. Animals were extremely sensitive to murderous aura. No matter how much blood a person had on his hands, no matter how ruthless he was, as long as he had not killed anyone, it was only a murderous aura, not a murderous aura. Only when a person had truly been stained with human life would it be a murderous aura. For example, some boxers or martial artists made a career out of beating people up every day. Their hands were stained with the blood of their enemies, as well as their own. This made them fearless and ruthless when they fought. However, everyone knew that they would act appropriately and would not kill anyone. Thus, there was no such thing as murderous aura, but a ruthless murderous aura. However, some people who had been stained with human life were completely different. They had really killed people. When others fought with them, they would be afraid because they knew that if they lost, they would die. Thus, they would lose their composure. This was also why those perverted murderers in the wanted posters were usually gentle and did not look like such people at all. It was hard to imagine how their hands were stained with so many human lives. Knerson Peters was an underground boxer. He had been boxing for more than 10 years. He had been boxing since he was 14 years old. This year, he was already 29 years old. He was even 1 year older than Jiang Hai. In 15 years, he had fought a total of 34 boxing matches and won all 34 matches. This was because if he lost a match, he would be abandoned. Even if the opponent did not beat him to death, he would be beaten to death by the boss. Therefore, among these underground boxers, who had been stained with human life, everyone had a murderous aura. It was also because of this murderous aura that he was targeted as soon as he walked in. Animals were extremely sensitive to murderous aura. As for Azalina, it was because of her profession. Don't forget what she used to do. Naturally, she had received special training. Although she had not done this training for a long time, she found someone who had the same murderous aura as her. Her intuition could not be wrong. But the difference between her and Conrad was that she could control and release it freely, while he could not. However, even though they could feel it, they didn't move. This was because they could also feel that his murderous aura was only consciously released from his body. This meant that he didn't have any murderous intent towards Jiang Hai and these people. "Have you eaten? You can have a bite here." In the United States, very few people would invite others to eat at their home. In the United States there was rarely such a thing. Treating guests to a meal was treating guests to a meal. There was no such thing as a home-cooked meal. Therefore, in the United States, it was rare to see people in other people's homes at noon or in the evening, unless they said that they wanted to treat you to a meal. However, Jiang Hai was not an American. According to the saying of Xia people, since they were here, they should eat together. For Jiang Hai's words, Doyle was somewhat not used to it, but he also knew that Jiang Hai was not just being polite, so he did not be too polite. He directly sat at the table, and Conrad also sat there. After Jiang Hai brought them new tableware, he no longer cared about them and started to eat. As for Doyle and Conrad, they also started to eat steaks, but when they had their first bite, their eyes couldn't help but brighten. Conrad only knew that this steak was delicious. But Doyle knew that this steak was not ordinary. Today's steak was not made by Jiang Hai, but by Xiaoya. During the days when Jiang Hai and the others were away, she also studied Western food, although her cooking was still far inferior to those Western chefs. But compared to Jiang Hai, it was already heaven and earth. For Jiang Hai's beef, she naturally knew that it was excellent. If she let Jiang Hai continue to cook like this, it would really be a waste, so now she was also trying to save these steaks. Looking at the two eating without caring about their image, Jiang Hai secretly scolded country bumpkins in his heart. But after thinking about it, this also proved that his beef was really good. Thinking about it, he still felt a little happy. Eat more if you like. I don't have much other things, but this is a game. Chapter 508. Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle George said without raising his head, "Of course, I won't stand on ceremony. You're a tycoon." But Conrad, who was beside him, was stunned for a moment, and then put down the fork in his hand. "What's wrong? Not to your liking?" Looking at him, Jiang Hai was taken aback for a moment, and then asked him, "No, it's delicious, it's really delicious, but I'm not here to eat steak. Mr. Jiang Hai, you've begged me twice. I, Conrad, don't have much money, nor do I have any ability. I only have a body that isn't afraid of hardship, so I want to repay you." Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. But as soon as his voice fell, the people at the table couldn't help but stop what they were doing. In particular, Bernice looked at Conrad in surprise, and then at Jiang Hai. That look made Jiang Hai quite speechless. But at this time, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to care about her, because after Conrad's voice fell, he couldn't help but feel his chrysanthemum tighten. Is this big guy interested in me? Even if he wants to repay me with his body, it has to be a beautiful woman. What's this? After a few seconds of silence, Jiang Hai said with a smile, I'm a person who doesn't ask for anything in return. No, it's up to you to decide whether you want to accept my gratitude, but it's up to me to decide whether I want to repay it." But Conrad's brain wasn't very good to begin with, so how could he understand this now? He said to Jiang Hai with a serious face, "But I really don't need it." Looking at Conrad, Jiang Hai immediately said. At this time, he didn't care whether he would hurt his feelings or not. Jiang Hai had no interest in men. He was a straight man who was harder than steel until he had no friends. Jiang Hai, I think you might have misunderstood what Conrad meant. He doesn't seem to have such thoughts in his mind. He doesn't seem to be interested in men or women. You should know what I'm talking about. When he said that he wanted to repay the debt of gratitude, he seemed to mean it literally. Looking at the determined look on Jiang Hai's face and the fact that Jiang Hai was too anxious to speak, Doyle George couldn't help but wipe the sweat off his forehead. Fortunately, he had interacted with Conrad many times, so he was the only one who could speak clearly now. Upon hearing what he said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth, not knowing what to say. Sigh, someone's thoughts are really dirty. Just when Jiang Hai was feeling a little embarrassed, Bernice also picked up a piece of steak and ate it while speaking proudly. She didn't know who had such a big reaction just now. Dirty my foot. But then again, I really don't need him to repay any debt of gratitude. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai looked at the big guy in front of him speechlessly. If Azalina hadn't appeared, he would have been a very good bodyguard. But now that Azalina and Bale were around, Jiang Hai didn't need him to be a bodyguard anymore. Moreover, the most important thing is that he doesn't know how to herd animals or catch fish. What use does Jiang Hai have for him? After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle actually understood that Jiang Hai had no use for him. Sigh, I think you probably know a little about his situation. Instead of letting him go out and be used by bad people and die out there, it's better to let him follow you. You're a billionaire now, so you should at least have a bodyguard by your side, right? However, since he and Conrad were acquaintances, it was impossible for him to watch Conrad go down the wrong path again. With Jiang Hai around, he felt relieved. Bodyguard? Okay. Looking at Conrad's anxious look, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, then looked at Azalina. When Azalina nodded, Jiang Hai nodded in acknowledgement of his existence. Thank you, benefactor. I'll do my best to protect you. Seeing that Jiang Hai had agreed, Conrad also stood up excitedly. For him, it was absolutely impossible to not repay a debt of gratitude. Being a bodyguard by Jiang Hai's side was definitely a very good thing for him. As for Doyle George, he could now rest assured. The reason why Jiang Hai accepted him as a bodyguard was actually that he had some ideas. Sometimes, there were some things that Azalina was a woman after all, and it was not easy for her to do. For example, deterrence. Who was more deterrent? A woman who looked about 1.8 meters tall and capable, or a man who was more than 2 meters tall, strong, fierce, and exuding a murderous aura? Just like what Zhang Hai had said before, he was very afraid of trouble, but if he had a beautiful woman by his side, there might be some idiots who would come for him. However, if he had such a guy by his side, he could probably scare off more than 95% of his enemies. This would have the effect of subduing the enemy without a fight. Zhang Hai was not the kind of person who would take pleasure in trampling on others, although it was indeed a very satisfying thing to trample on others sometimes. However, this matter also depended on the situation. It was very interesting in the early stages, but with Zhang Hai's current strength, if there were any idiots who came looking for trouble, then they would not be trampling on others, but on the brain. As his level increased, the people he wanted to trample on would naturally also increase in level. As for Azalina, she had naturally received Zhang Hai's message, and in fact, she thought so too. With such a strong, deterrent, and simple-minded person who was absolutely loyal to Zhang Hai, it would be a lot easier for her. Besides, Zhang Hai now had a net worth of billions. It was indeed a little difficult to have only one bodyguard, but with this guy, it would be much easier. Since he had agreed to accept him as a bodyguard, Zhang Hai would give him an official identity. After lunch, Zhang Hai called Moses Adams and asked him to prepare a bodyguard contract. The bodyguard's contract was the same as Azalina's, but there were some differences, because Conrad's salary was less than hers. However, Conrad didn't care. In any case, as long as he had food to eat and clothes to wear, he didn't have any concept of money. Zhang Hai gave him a salary of $1,000 a week. Apart from the missions, his base salary for a year was $52,000. Most importantly, he didn't need to pay taxes. Zhang Hai would pay all the taxes, including food, accommodation, and equipment. When he heard Zhang Hai's salary, to be honest, Doyle even wanted to come over and be Zhang Hai's bodyguard. But unfortunately, even if he came over, Zhang Hai wouldn't want him. What ability did he have to eat and wait for death at Zhang Hai's place? The contract was in triplicate and was delivered by Penelope Dahl in the afternoon. This was the first time Zhang Hai saw Penelope Dahl since he came back from Huaxia, but at this time, she didn't seem to have anything to say to Zhang Hai. After delivering the contract and watching Zhang Hai and Connerson Peters sign their names, she went to find her father. This made Zhang Hai feel a little embarrassed. Just now he greeted her warmly, but in the end, he only got an N. Serves you right. Seeing Zhang Hai eat a turtle, Bernice was very happy and said softly with a smile on her face. Zhang Hai looked at Penelope as she left. He didn't want to disturb her conversation with her father. After all, the misunderstanding between her and her father had only been resolved recently. Actually, it wasn't that Zhang Hai said anything. If it wasn't for the fact that she saw that her father could really earn money from her, she probably wouldn't have bothered with her father. But you could say that she was realistic. She returned the money her father gave her, intact. Zhang Hai didn't know what to say to her, so he could only not be a third wheel. Therefore, after thinking about it for a while, he realized that Connerson didn't have a place to stay, so he went to find a place for Connerson to stay. In fact, it was reasonable to say that a bodyguard should live in the same building as Zhang Hai, but Zhang Hai's side was full of women except for him. It was indeed a little inconvenient, so although there were many empty rooms, Zhang Hai didn't let him live here. Zhang Hai's family had a lot of villas for workers. When these villas were first built, the previous owner probably built them with full ranches, full fishing grounds, and full wineries. But he didn't think that Zhang Hai was a little too generous. Logically speaking, a villa had 3 rooms, so 3 people should live in it. As for the wives of the cowboy and the fisherman, they lived separately. Even if they lived together, they lived in one room. But Zhang Hai was different. He divided them according to family. So now there was not a single empty house. In this case they could only squeeze in. The person Zhang Hai chose was none other than Harriman Fells, because in his manner, he was probably the easiest person to talk to. Sure enough, when Zhang Hai told Harriman Fells about this matter, Harriman happily agreed. He and Conrad were actually the same kind of people. Their brains were a bit slow, but they were tall, exceptionally powerful, and their strength was not small. It was just that their lives were completely different. Conrad was cheated by his friend and went to fight in the underground boxing ring for more than 10 years. In the end, he didn't leave a penny. He was only left with a body full of injuries and terrifying combat power. But Zhang Hai didn't care about these injuries, because his spiritual energy could easily heal those internal injuries. And Harriman, with the help of many kind neighbors, lived peacefully in Winthrop as a cowboy. And he met Zhang Hai, a good boss, so their experiences were completely different. But now that the two of them met, they really felt a little regretful that they hadn't met earlier. Looking at the two who were very satisfied, Zhang Hai was also very satisfied. Standing in front of them, Zhang Hai looked at them. When the two of them stood together, their aura was really a little scary. The two men were more than 2 meters tall, and their bodies were abnormally huge. One of them exercised all year round, and the other herded cows all year round. Their muscles were not small. If they put on a straight face, shave their heads, get some tattoos, wear a black suit, and wear sunglasses. TSK, it would be very cool just thinking about it. In case Zhang Hai went out to negotiate or something in the future, he could definitely bring these two people with him. They could definitely scare a group of people. After settling Conrad down, Zhang Hai returned to his villa. He laid down on the white jade bed and began to think about his next move. Chapter 509. How are you doing here? Lying on a recliner made of jade, Zhang Hai wore sunglasses and looked at the sun in the sky while asking Conrad, who was practicing beside him. Very good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Conrad, who was doing push-ups with all his might, replied in a muffled voice, then continued to train, allowing sweat to drip from his body. Are you having a good time with Harriman? Hearing his words, Zhang Hai continued to ask. Very good. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Conrad was still doing his push-ups and continued to say, how are you getting along with the others? Seeing that he still said the same two words, Zhang Hai continued to lie there and asked him. Very good. But unfortunately, the answer to Zhang Hai was still the same two words. Hey, can't you say something else? Sitting up helplessly, Zhang Hai raised the sunglasses on his face and looked at Conrad helplessly. Does this guy have no other words other than saying, very good? Not bad. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Conrad hesitated for a moment and changed from very good to another word. Tizai, waving his hand at him, Zhang Hai continued to lie down. It's very comfortable to bask in the sun here. Today is August 22nd, and it's also the 5th day since Conrad came to Zhang Hai's house. These days, Conrad was still a little reserved when he first came. Basically, he would come to Zhang Hai's villa when he got up in the morning. Wherever Zhang Hai went, he would follow. According to him, he is Zhang Hai's bodyguard. So naturally, he should go wherever Zhang Hai goes. But Zhang Hai is not going to take such a guy with him. So on the 3rd day, Zhang Hai told him that he doesn't need to follow him, and he can do whatever he wants. But he really has nothing to do. After inadvertently seeing the training room in Zhang Hai's villa that is not used except for storms, he told Zhang Hai that he wanted to borrow those training equipment. Zhang Hai naturally had no problem with this. He was happy that this guy didn't follow him, so he immediately lent it all out. He even took the initiative to drive him to the town to pick out a few sets of sportswear. Of course, they were all Nike because these things were not expensive here. According to Zhang Hai, he wanted to let him use the equipment here directly. But Conrad was unwilling. He only took a series of things such as sandbags and dumbbells and moved them to the lawn of the villa. Then he began to practice there. Next to this place was originally the place where Zhang Hai usually basked in the sun. That is, the place where Bernice likes to snatch Zhang Hai's place. But in the next few months, she will not snatch Zhang Hai's place. Because the sun has been too strong recently. Although she also likes to bask in the sun, she is not going to get tanned. So in these 2 days, Conrad no longer followed Zhang Hai, but when Zhang Hai is basking in the sun here, there is always a fierce man training beside him, which makes Zhang Hai a little dumbfounded. But no matter what, he is adapting to everything. Zhang Hai estimated that it is difficult to change this guy's mind. Since he can't change him, he can only let himself adapt. Zhang Hai, aren't you leaving tomorrow? Aren't you going to prepare some luggage or something? Looking at Zhang Hai's leisurely appearance, Bernice, who had just picked some fresh vegetables from the vegetable garden at this time, said with some dissatisfaction. Bernice seems to like staying in Zhang Hai's manor more and more recently. She gave up such a big research institute in Miami and just stayed here with Zhang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai doesn't care whether she stays here or not. Recently, little Ya's condition has further improved. Although her appearance is still the same, without a trace of blood like a vampire, she can bask in the sun in the room all day long. Even in the morning and evening, Bernice has allowed her to go out, but from 10 o'clock in the morning, she will be grounded until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These 6 hours are unshakable, and she needs to slowly adapt. But for little Ya, this is already great news. It is precisely because she doesn't have to always look after little Ya that Bernice also walks around the manor all day long. Everyone knows her, and everyone also knows that this woman and Jiang Hai have some unclear relationship. And most importantly, whether it is Delina, Marian or Aphrodite, they are all a little afraid of her. These people who are close to Jiang Hai don't dare to provoke. The fishermen and cowboys naturally don't dare to provoke them. Even Dulles and his apprentice are respectful to Bernice. Of course, they are more wary of her identity as a doctor. In the United States, the professional status of a doctor is still very high, very high. And this Bernice doesn't know what's wrong with her, but when she saw Jiang Hai lazily sitting there, she couldn't help but get angry. Hey, what's there to pack up? I'm just going for 2 or 3 days. It's not good to let others wait for me on the same day. They are royalty, right? Then I'll do something the next day, and if there's a banquet in the evening, I'll come back on the 3rd day. If there's no banquet, I'll come back directly. Jiang Hai lazily glanced at Bernice, and said in a very tired voice, "It's really unbearable. If there's nothing, why don't you go to town and take a look? These tour groups were brought here by you. Aren't you worried about any disputes? Why don't you go and see the income of your shooting range? Why don't you go and see the income of your villas?" Seeing that Jiang Hai is still half dead, Bernice began to talk with money. But unfortunately, Bernice's words have no meaning. Who told Jiang Hai to not care about money at all? Hey, what's yours is yours. Don't force it if it's not yours. If I go, won't the dispute still happen? Moses Adams sent people to watch the villas and the shooting range. I'm not a professional. Why should I watch? Glancing at Bernice, Jiang Hai still said slowly. Listening to his words, she really wants to kick him. Who cares if you die? Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Bernice glared at him and walked into the villa. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also changed his position to lie down, but just as he lay down, he saw Conrad's big face. What? Seeing his big face, Jiang Hai was shocked, so he immediately asked him, "Boss, if you want to go to Atlantic City, I'll go with you." Looking at Jiang Hai, it was obvious that Conrad's expression was not very clear. Jiang Hai listened to his words and couldn't help but smile. If it weren't for the 5 days of contact, he probably would have thought that this was a confession. No need, you stay at home and look after the house. With a wave of his hand, Jiang Hai directly ordered. But I'm your bodyguard. Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said with a serious face. Protecting Jiang Hai is his duty. I said no need, so there's no need. Why don't we try a fight? Hearing Conrad's words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face. Since he can't talk to him, then he'll use his fists to make him understand this truth. Fight. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad also looked at Jiang Hai strangely. What does this sentence mean? That's right, let's fight. How about this, let's fight. If I win, you'll have to listen to me in the future. You're my bodyguard, right? You'll do whatever I tell you to do. If you win, then you can do whatever you want. Looking at the puzzled Conrad in front of him, Jiang Hai suddenly sat up and said excitedly, Really? Then I can go to Atlantic City with you? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad was also very excited. His big eyes shone with a fierce light. To be honest, the reason he went to the underground boxing scene was partly because he was cheated by his friends, and partly because he really liked to fight. Of course, he would still hold back his strength when fighting with Jiang Hai, but it didn't mean that he would give up fighting. Of course it's true. As soon as Jiang Hai's voice fell, Conrad's big hand came slapping over. On August 23rd, on the road from Boston to New York, Jiang Hai drove his combat spirit. He wore sunglasses and whistled. Feeling the empty car, he couldn't help but sing along with the music on the radio. At this time, in Jiang Hai's manner, Conrad was training hard, but in addition to the muscles on his body, there were some purplish bruises, which also represented the results of his fight with Jiang Hai yesterday. To be honest, when Conrad fought with Jiang Hai, it really scared Jiang Hai at first. After all, this guy had killed people, and that murderous aura was real. Although Jiang Hai had killed people before, it was all in self-defense, and he had never taken the initiative to attack. Therefore, at first, he was really intimidated by this murderous aura, and took a few punches seriously. But then, his physical fitness that was 4 times that of an ordinary person, in addition to his powerful combat power, broke out here. No matter how strong Conrad was, he was just an ordinary person. How could he be a match for Jiang Hai, a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus Rex? In the end, he was beaten up by Jiang Hai. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai was here now, and why he was at home. I'm looking afar, on the moon. How many dreams are flying freely? Jiang Hai sang like this. The car passed through Boston, New York, entered New Jersey, and arrived in Atlantic City. Last time, Jiang Hai came in a hurry and left in an even more hurry, so he didn't have time to appreciate the situation of the second-largest gambling city in the United States. This time, he wasn't going to leave like last time. As for Perwalton's sigh, it was better not to see it if possible. Bam! Just as Jiang Hai was playing and singing along the way, preparing to enjoy the scenery of the gambling city tonight, a car suddenly stopped in the opposite lane, then changed direction and stopped directly in front of Jiang Hai. Chapter 5:10. F***CK. What's the situation? Jiang Hai stepped on the brakes. The quality of Jiang Hai's shield was good. Although he stepped on the brakes, the braking was still quite good. He only slid forward a few meters before coming to a stop. But this shook him a lot. He opened the door with some doubts, and Jiang Hai stretched his head out. In broad daylight, on the road. Is there someone who wants to deal with me? Is this person too stupid? Here, the police can come here in less than a minute. What the hell is this? Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, 3 people came down from the opposite car. When he saw these 3 people, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. Because these 3 people, to be exact, he knew them. Ugh, hi pra, how did I meet you here? Yes, the person who came out of the car at this time was not someone else. It was Perwalton, and the other 2 women, Cheryl Lee and Barbara Martina, who had sex with Jiang Hai that day. When these 3 women came out, Jiang Hai subconsciously knew that the situation might not be good. Not bad, you still remember me. Come out. Walking to the front of Jiang Hai's car door, Perwalton looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Then, without giving Jiang Hai a chance to resist, she directly opened his driver's door from the inside, and then pulled Jiang Hai out. Of course, Jiang Hai was afraid of hurting her. Otherwise, with her little strength, how could she pull Jiang Hai? Hey, what are you doing? Looking at her rough actions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little stunned. What's the situation? You still have the nerve to ask me what I'm doing? Humph. You will know in a while. You 2 go and drive. Let's go back. Glancing at the panicked Jiang Hai, Perwalton directly opened the back door of Jiang Hai's car, threw Jiang Hai in, and said to the 2 women behind her. The 2 women naturally knew what Perwalton meant, so one got in their own car, and the other got in Jiang Hai's car. The car started again and went to Perwalton's home in Atlantic City. Hey, I still have something to do. Hurry up. Feeling the car driving away, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly. He wanted to explain something, but before he finished speaking, Perwalton's mouth had already kissed Jiang Hai's mouth. The tongue flexibly invaded Jiang Hai's mouth. Although Perwalton had little experience in this area, she was much more familiar with kissing and touching than Jiang Hai. After all, there were so many girls for her to train. For a while, Jiang Hai didn't dare to move. He was afraid of hurting Perwalton, but he was so passive that he didn't know what to do. Well, it tastes good. Cheryl, it really has a completely different feeling from you. The smell of sweat on the man's body is quite good after smelling it for a long time. Perwalton raised her head again. There was still a trace of transparent liquid on her and Jiang Hai's lips, but she didn't care. After saying something to Cheryl, who was driving, she kissed Jiang Hai under his surprised gaze. The 2 communicated with each other for about 10 minutes before Perwalton panted and left. Hey, I said, is that enough? Jiang Hai said speechlessly after wiping his mouth full of saliva. Enough? How is that possible? Do you think it's possible without a real fight? Narrowing her eyes, Perwalton slowly climbed onto Jiang Hai's body. She looked at Zhang Hai with narrowed eyes and smiled. Then she grabbed Zhang Hai's weapon. With this grab, Zhang Hai couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This woman wouldn't want to waste him, right? Just as Zhang Hai was about to resist even if it meant hurting her, Perwalton suddenly released his weapon and then bent down clumsily. Feeling her movements, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel a little confused and a little panicked. He looked at the cars that kept passing by outside the window. To be honest, it wasn't that he hadn't done it in the car before. For example, he had done it with Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunchen when they were together, but they chose some more remote and quiet places. It was his first time driving while on the road. The feeling of excitement and shyness came together, and it seemed to make Zhang Hai's desire to fight stronger. At this time, Perwalton, who felt that Zhang Hai was different, also raised her head and squatted there with a smile. She took off her black dress from the bottom to the top. In an instant, her naked body appeared in front of Zhang Hai. It seems that she has been prepared for a long time. Then she gently pushed Zhang Hai, motioning for Zhang Hai to lie down, and then she sat on Zhang Hai's body. With a soft moan, the old driver went on the road again. This drifting made Zhang Hai somewhat unprepared. "Hey, are you crazy?" Zhang Hai said to Perwalton in a low voice as he propped up his upper body. "Shut up. Just cooperate with me. You don't know how sad you made me these days. I thought it was enough for me to have a woman, but it was you who let me know it. Now, I like it the most, Perwalton said to Zhang Hai with a look of displeasure as she glanced at Zhang Hai. "Even if you want to do that, you have to go back first. What's going on now?" Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was really embarrassed, but there were indeed some things that he did. Now that he mentioned it, it was really a bit troublesome. "What's going on? You didn't even tell me that you came to Atlantic City. What's going on?" Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Perwalton bent down while moving and looked at Zhang Hai with a playful expression. "I said I'm here to discuss business." With a slightly awkward smile, Zhang Hai said somewhat speechlessly. "Then this is my business." Seeing Zhang Hai's appearance, Perwalton glanced at him and said with a smile, "Don't blame me for this." Looking at her engrossed appearance, Zhang Hai gritted his teeth. If he doesn't hurry up, who knows what will happen in a while. Thinking of this, Zhang Hai also took the initiative to join the battlefield and blew the horn to charge. "Hey, don't move." Feeling Zhang Hai launching a new round of charge, Perwalton was also taken aback. What a joke. She knows Zhang Hai's combat power. If he gets serious, she is no match for him. But Zhang Hai was not going to listen to her. Not only did he launch an attack, but his hands and mouth were also not idle. The instantaneous attack made Perwalton a little overwhelmed, and her body was powerless as Zhang Hai's attack came. On the other side, Cheryl, who was driving, kept looking at the scene in the rearview mirror. This made her subconsciously lick her lips and clamp her legs even tighter. But now that she was driving, she didn't want to have any accidents. But hearing the sound in her ear, she couldn't help but look at the rearview mirror, which could only make her drive very slowly. The drive that was originally more than half an hour took more than an hour to arrive. When the car drove into Perwalton's manor, she was already lying weakly on the steering wheel, and Perwalton was also lying weakly on Zhang Hai's body for the third time. As for Zhang Hai, he had also completed his second attack. Even if his physical fitness was 4 times that of ordinary people, he couldn't help but feel a little tired. Phew, get out of the car." After about 5 minutes, Perwalton sat up and forcibly pulled out the weapon that was still very strong. Ignoring the liquid that was flowing down from a certain part of his body, he opened the car door and walked out without wearing any clothes. "Hey!" Looking at her directly getting out of the car, Zhang Hai subconsciously glanced outside. Sure enough, there were people outside. Several women in maid outfits were standing respectfully in front of the car door at this time. They ignored Perwalton's appearance, but they were looking at Zhang Hai curiously. This made Zhang Hai a little scared, and he subconsciously wanted to take his clothes and put them on, but at this time, Cheryl Lee in the driver's seat had already recovered. After walking to the car door, she grabbed all the clothes in her hand and handed them to the servant next to her. After the servant took the clothes, she directly left. "Hey, my clothes!" Seeing this scene, Zhang Hai really panicked and immediately shouted at that person. "Okay, what's there to shout about? They are all women, what are you shy about?" Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl glanced at Zhang Hai. "It's all this guy's fault. I can't keep my underwear today. It's precisely because they are all women that I have to be shy, okay? I'm not a woman. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai was quite speechless. What kind of logic is this? Is there a mistake? Didn't I look at the almanac before going out? Why do I always run into female hooligans? Tisk, with your relationship with Miss Pra, as long as you are willing, they are all yours. What are you shy about? Hurry up and get out. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Cheryl looked at Zhang Hai contemptuously, then pulled Zhang Hai out of the car. This Cheryl and Prawalton were the same. They both had done it with Zhang Hai. Although Zhang Hai was a bit of a bastard, he didn't dare to hurt them. But he really didn't dare to use too much strength to hurt them. But when would it end if he kept pushing and giving in like this? Sighing helplessly, Zhang Hai grabbed the cushion on the seat next to him. No matter what, he couldn't just get out of the car like that. How embarrassing would that be? Covering his vital parts and bending his body, Zhang Hai walked to the car. Just as he got out of the car, Cheryl closed the door. This also cut off Zhang Hai's escape route. Unless Zhang Hai wanted to run out naked. Looking at this situation, Zhang Hai couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. He followed Cheryl into the villa while looking back 3 times with every step. Just as he entered the villa's hall, Zhang Hai was speechless when he saw the situation inside. Because at this moment, Prawalton was lying on a huge sofa in the hall. She was still naked. There were 4 women beside her. 3 of them were beside her. One let her head rest on her long legs and gently massaged her head. Another let her legs rest on her legs and gently massaged her legs. The last one was squatting in front of her, peeling off the grapes in the fruit plate in front of her. After removing the seeds, she put them in her mouth and fed them to her. Chapter 5:11. The only one who was relatively normal was standing respectfully in front of the sofa. But the most abnormal thing was that everyone, including Prawalton, was naked. When Zhang Hai walked in, everyone looked at him with some curiosity, some envy, and some excitement in their eyes. Of course, Zhang Hai also knew the excited person. It was Barbara Martina, who was feeding Prawalton grapes at this time. Hey, Zhang, you're finally here. Miss, have you had enough? Is it my turn now? Seeing Zhang Hai coming over and feeding Prawalton a grape, Barbara Martina stood up excitedly and wanted to go to Zhang Hai. Hey, I've been holding back all the way. I'll go first. Looking at the excited Barbara, before Zhang Hai had time to speak, he was hugged from behind. He looked back and saw that the person hugging him was none other than Cheryl Lee, who brought him in. He didn't know when she was also naked, hugging Zhang Hai from behind. Oh my God, what the hell is this? Feeling the oppression behind him, Zhang Hai was a little numb. Is my hidden attribute really that of a duckling? Why don't these female hooligans consider my feelings? Hey, at least you have something to look and listen to, unlike me who has to wait here. Hearing what Cheryl said, Barbara couldn't help but yell at her angrily. They would retreat in front of Prawalton, but she wouldn't in front of others. Then I'll let you look and listen again. Hearing her words, Cheryl wasn't someone to be trifled with. She retorted forcefully. All right. Aren't you afraid of making a fool of yourself in front of Zhang Hai? You've all tasted meat, so bear with it. Let the sisters who haven't tasted it go first. It's their first time and they need your support. But at that moment, Prawalton waved her hand and set the tone. And hearing her words, the 3 women around her couldn't help but blush and lower their heads. Now, in their hearts, 70% were fear, 20% were doubts, and 10% had some inexplicable feelings. Hey, I'm not a breeder. I'm not here to breed, okay? Have you ever considered my feelings when you say that? Hearing that they had arranged his work, Zhang Hai was a little unhappy and said directly to Prawalton. And at that moment, Barbara suddenly took the opportunity when Zhang Hai was talking to take his cushion away. Yo, your mouth is tough, but your body is honest. I know your physical fitness. Don't say those useless things. I'll leave it to you. Looking at the cushion being taken away, Prawalton couldn't help but chuckle. Then she winked at the 3 women around her. Although they were unwilling, they still walked over. They couldn't refuse Prawalton's request. If you don't want to, you can resist. Looking at the 3 women who walked over, Zhang Hai said to them. But they shook their heads. As for Cheryl and Barbara, they had already squatted down. To them, a feast was on. In the situation where Jiang Hai was powerless to resist, the battle unfolded in the living room. 2 hours later, the battle venue changed to the bathroom. An hour later, it changed to the kitchen. An hour later, it changed to the dining room. After another hour and a half, they returned to Prawalton's room. He didn't know if it was her original style, or if it was because she came back after seeing Jiang Hai's big bed. Prawalton's bed was also very big. It was 6 meters wide and 3 meters wide. It wouldn't feel small even if 6 or 7 people slept on it. At this time, Jiang Hai and Prawalton were lying side by side on her big bed. Jiang Hai's face was somewhat pale. Throughout the day, even when it was time to eat, he had been working hard to farm, even though his body was naturally gifted. He also felt that his waist was a little numb. This feeling was similar to when more than a dozen dolphins came into the manor. Jiang Hai released the aura of more than a dozen scales in one breath. The consumption was really huge. "Are you trying to squeeze me dry?" Jiang Hai said weakly as he looked at the 3 girls who were still working hard under him. These 3 girls were the ones that Jiang Hai had done something to earlier today. One was called Colin Barlovich, one was called Fail Fail, and one was called Isabel Roland. The last one, Isabel Roland, was Prawalton's housekeeper. At the beginning, these 3 girls were very shy and afraid of Jiang Hai. They were also unwilling to move too much. As a result, after the first round, Jiang Hai discovered that it was all an illusion. Because he was kind enough to treat these girls, there was some pain in the beginning, but there was no follow-up damage. But who would have thought that this opened the door to a new world in their hearts? They could be considered to have tasted the taste of the marrow, and they had been taking turns to attack. "You don't live with us every day. What do you have to be squeezed dry? Really?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton rolled her eyes at him, and then touched Barbara who was under her, and Cheryl who was on her chest. They usually played like this. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai was really speechless. Suddenly, Prawalton turned her head and looked at Jiang Hai curiously. "By the way, I heard that the more you use a man's thing, the better it is. Seeing that you are so good, you must have played with a lot of women. How should I put it? Outside hunting, it's not that many times, only 2 or 3, and it's very rare. Specifically, there are some fixed ones about 3. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't hide anything from her. After all, she knows that Prawalton likes women, so it is impossible between him and her, so Jiang Hai treats her more as a brother, although the situation between her and him doesn't seem to be so pure. "Only a few? Bull ****. I have seen the 10 beauties in your manor, and they all like you. Will you do anything to them?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton asked curiously. "Cough, I'm still going to get married in the future. Besides, I'm a very possessive person. If they really follow me, I definitely won't let them go. At that time, who would want to be with such a playboy? And I can't marry them, so." Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little embarrassed. "Don't you have a wife? We have met once." Hearing that Jiang Hai is going to get married, Prawalton was a little surprised. "Well, that woman is indeed my wife, but nothing happened between us." Looking at her curious eyes, Jiang Hai thought about it and told her the truth about his love life. Speaking of it, Jiang Hai is really a shame for the rich. He not only doesn't have a proper wife, but he doesn't seem to have many lovers. In addition to Feng Yunchen and Ai Xiaoxi, there is only Selena Gomez. And the most important thing is that they are not by his side now. If he needs anything, he has to rely on little left and little right to solve it. It may be because of this that today, Jiang Hai will not refuse anyone. "Wow, I didn't expect your life to be so complicated, but your life is a failure. Do you know how many women I have?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile. "I don't know." Discussing with a woman who has just fought with him how many women he has slept with, Jiang Hai is really. What the hell? This strong sense of contradiction is really not comparable to ordinary people. I should have had 517. Looking up at the ceiling, Prawalton thought for a moment and said, "Me." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. "More than 500? Is it that exaggerated? The 5 of them are my wives, and will always stay by my side. However, women will get tired of looking at them all the time. So, I will still look for new women all over the world. They will also help me find things. Looking at Zhang Hai's surprised look, Prawalton said with a smile. Looking at her smug look, Zhang Hai really wanted to slap her to death. I have played with beauties all over the world, the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Japan, Korea, Huaxia, Soviet Russia, England, France, Germany. I have even played with North Korea and Africa. The women in each place are different. Looking at Zhang Hai, Prawalton also excitedly talked about her love history. As for Zhang Hai, listening to her words, he had no other way but to smile awkwardly. He is really a rookie. Do you know where the women are the most delicious? As if she didn't see Zhang Hai's embarrassment, Prawalton said excitedly. I don't know. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai really didn't know this. South Korea is the most fun. Seeing that Zhang Hai really didn't know, Prawalton didn't keep him in suspense and said with a serious face. South Korea? Hearing her words, the first thing that came to Zhang Hai's mind was the South Korean girl group. Her looks were indeed good and her figure was great. But when he thought about the most famous thing in South Korea, Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh. They are very beautiful and have good figures, but don't you find that they look a bit alike? Looking at Prawalton, Zhang Hai looked at her and said with a smile, but as soon as his voice fell, Cheryl raised her head and glanced at him, which made Zhang Hai a little overwhelmed again. He forgot that there was still Cheryl. But Cheryl should be real. At least, Zhang Hai didn't feel any artificial traces on her. She is a natural beauty. I just want you to fight with them, not marry them. What are you worried about? Glancing at Zhang Hai, Prawalton directly refuted Zhang Hai's words, and Zhang Hai thought about it. It seems that she is right. Chapter 5:12. At night, the summer wind blew gently, taking away the heat in the room, and at the same time, it also took away that trace of strange smell. When it was midnight, Zhang Hai, who was sleeping in the middle, suddenly opened his eyes and glanced at the girls who were sleeping soundly beside him. Zhang Hai slowly got up. Because there were no clothes here, Zhang Hai could only walk out of the room with a bath towel wrapped around his waist. As soon as he walked out of the door, Zhang Hai couldn't help stroking his waist. What the hell? I won't be envious of those male protagonists anymore. It's really too tiring. It seems like our country's monogamy policy is not to protect the rights of women, but to allow men to live longer. After moving his body, Zhang Hai sighed. Since Prawalton got in his car, he had hardly stopped. In the car, he fought Prawalton twice. Here, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Fail Ferrio, and Isabelle Loren. Then, he fought Cheryl and Barbara. Then, he fought Prawalton. Then, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Isabelle Loren, and Fail Ferrio. It could be said that today, Zhang Hai didn't do anything else but fight. He fought a total of 13 times. Of course, the number of times these women fought was no less than that of Zhang Hai. After all, their fighting strength was not as good as Zhang Hai's. Zhang Hai had no problem fighting 2 of them at the same time. But fighting 6 of them at the same time, he was somewhat powerless. After all, he wasn't a professional. After patting his waist, Zhang Hai went downstairs to the bathroom. After going to the bathroom, he went to the kitchen. He had fought so many times today, including in the kitchen, so he didn't eat seriously. No one's body could stand it if he only ate and didn't eat, so now he had to find something to eat. However, after opening the refrigerator in the kitchen, Zhang Hai was depressed. There was nothing but wine and drinks. That's not right. If there's no food here, what did I eat for dinner? Looking at the full plate in front of him, but there was nothing to fill his stomach, Zhang Hai couldn't help but mutter in a low voice. We don't store leftovers here. What we eat every day is freshly made, whether it's bread or other things. Vegetables and meat are only bought on the same day, so there's nothing in the fridge. Just as Zhang Hai was struggling to listen, a voice suddenly sounded beside him. Zhang Hai looked back and found that Isabelle Roland had unknowingly run to his side. Compared to Zhang Hai, who shyly put on a bath towel, she was much more direct and naked. What the hell? You scared me. If you don't put anything in the fridge, where do you put it? Looking at the French beauty beside him, Zhang Hai was really shocked, but then he thought about it. What's there to be afraid of looking for food? So he asked her. Come with me. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Isabella took out 4 bottles of beer from inside and walked outside with Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at her movements and couldn't help but be a little puzzled. What is she doing? Before Jiang Hai could react, she had already opened the door of the villa. Then 2 women in maid outfits appeared at the door. When they saw Isabel come out, they couldn't help but nod to her, indicating that they were greeting her. Prepare some supper for me. By the way, what do you want to eat? After saying something to the girl outside, Isabella looked at Jiang Hai. It seemed that she was no stranger to ordering food with her body naked. She should have done it a lot in the past. Anything is fine. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still a little shy, but he whispered in the dark. I remember that the people in the northeast of Xueqi like to eat kebabs. Let's do it like this. After thinking for a while, Isabella ordered the maid in front of her, then closed the door, and then took Jiang Hai to the balcony on the 2nd floor of the villa. She walked straight out of the villa and came to the balcony. At this time, there were a few chairs on the balcony. The chairs were made of real leather, and they were quite big boss chairs. Although Isabella was not short, about 1.75 meters, she was very thin, and when she sat on it, she sank into it. There were some blankets and the like on the chair, so she walked straight to the chair, curled her whole body into it, and then pulled the blanket over her back. She didn't have any movements to hide the moon and a certain brown forest in front of Jiang Hai, but it made Jiang Hai a little overwhelmed. Following her in, Jiang Hai also sat on an old chair, pulled the blanket over his body, and didn't know what to say. Although we have already done that kind of thing, we don't seem to be very familiar with each other. Let me introduce myself. My name is Isabel Roland. I am the housekeeper of this manor and one of Miss Pulla's girlfriends. Of course, things like serving in bed are our honor. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't speak, Isabella opened a bottle of Budweiser beer alone. After taking a sip, she took the initiative to talk to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also moved his mouth and opened a bottle of beer. Well, my name is Jiang Hai. I am from Xueqi. I am now running a manor in Boston. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also introduced himself. In fact, he guessed that these girls knew about his situation. As expected, the moment he finished speaking, Isabel had already said, I know you. Your beef is the best. This batch of beef made Pulla earn a lot of money and made her position in the family rise significantly. She was very happy during those few days and even specially organized a party for a week. Unfortunately, at that time, you didn't have this kind of relationship with us. Otherwise, you could have joined as well. Just the party alone invited dozens of famous models and many socialites and outsiders. Hundreds of women openly organized a party here and the atmosphere was quite good. If you came, you would have a great advantage, Isabella said while throwing a flirtatious glance at Jiang Hai. This almost made Jiang Hai choke to death. He almost couldn't handle 6 of them, and hundreds of them? But thinking of that scene, he still wanted to live for a few more years. Ahem, I have a doubt. To be honest, do you really like women? If it's true, why didn't you resist when she asked you to accompany me? Since there was no way to continue this topic, Jiang Hai could only change the topic. But this matter was also the most puzzling point because he could see the resistance in these girls' eyes at the beginning. Resist? Why should we resist? Anyway, we just do what Miss Pulla told us. She won't harm us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Isabella said calmly. What's the situation? Looking at Isabella's appearance, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why do they believe in Prawalton so much? What confidence do they have to be in her hands? Or is it because they have such a tendency? To us, Pulla is not just a simple partner. In our eyes, Miss Pulla is our sky, our god. We will not do anything to disobey her or make her unhappy. As long as she asks us to do so, even if she asks us to die, we will not blink our eyes. Moreover, in the beginning, when we were with you, we were indeed a little scared. But after that, it felt pretty good. We have never experienced this feeling before. Looking at Jiang Hai, Isabella said with a smile, but her words made Jiang Hai even more curious. What kind of feeling is this? Let me tell you a story. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Isabella chuckled and then told a story to Jiang Hai. This story was a bit melodramatic but very simple. This story happened in the middle of France. The girl in the story originally had a happy family, but her father drank something because he made a mistake with a bad friend. In the end, the family was broken. He also fell ill once, but he did not have the money to buy medicine. As a result, he robbed a store. When he went out, he happened to meet the police and was directly shot to death. After this incident, the girl's mother took the girl away from the small town and went to a nearby city. She married a stepfather with a bad temper and an extreme alcoholic. At first, it was nothing more than some beatings and scoldings, which the girl could endure. But when the girl was 14 years old, the stepfather actually wanted to rape her. She desperately escaped and called the police. The police took her stepfather away, but her mother scolded her for being a jinx. Because of her, the family that her mother had rebuilt with great difficulty was broken again. One night, her mother left the house with her younger brother. At the age of 14, she had no choice but to find a job in order to survive, but she was targeted by a group of hooligans. These hooligans had snuck into her house with the intention of harming her. When she was escaping, she accidentally fell down and was caught by these hooligans. Just when she thought that her life was going to end just like that, she suddenly remembered something. A woman descended from the sky. Her bodyguards knocked down these hooligans and gave them the punishment they deserved. She followed this woman to the United States, followed this woman, received higher education, and became one of this woman's girlfriends. To this girl, this woman was her everything, her God. No matter what, as long as she still wanted her, she would do anything. This was Isabella's story. Zhang Hai sat at the side and listened to this slightly melodramatic story. However, he knew that this should be true. The women in this story should not be Isabella and Prawalton. You can ask the other 4 stories if you have time, but they are basically similar to this. When the story was finished, the table in front of Zhang Hai and Isabella suddenly split open. A plate of barbecued meat rose from below and appeared in front of them. Chapter 5:13. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai woke up from his sleep with a special feeling. He opened his eyes in a daze and looked down. At this moment, Colin Barlovich and Fail Ferio, whom he had just met yesterday, were working hard. Seeing this scene, there was no need to describe the feeling. I say, what are you guys doing? Patting himself on the forehead, Zhang Hai did not refuse their service. Early in the morning as a man he had a kind of, that kind of impulse. Someone to help him take care of it, seems to have gone off topic. See, I said you were using too much force, just be a bit gentler. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Failor Ferio patted Colin Bavrovich, who was still working hard, and said with a look of contempt. Hi, I'm sorry, I didn't think of that either. But I really like the taste of this. It would be even better if I added some of your taste. Colin smiled as he looked apologetically at Fail. Then do you want to do it? Since he's awake? Hearing Colin's words, Fail also came over. After the 2 women had a wet kiss, Fail looked at the person in front of him and suggested. Good idea. Following Colin's words, Fail stood up and straddled Zhang Hai. Hey, it's so early in the morning. Seeing Fail's actions, Zhang Hai couldn't help but immediately stop. I can't care so much. Ignoring Zhang Hai's words, the battle between Fail and Zhang Hai began. Of course, Colin, who was behind them, would definitely be involved. When Zhang Hai woke up, he glanced at his watch. It was 7:50 in the morning. When he came out of the room, it was already 9:20. On the other side, Colin and Fail were already lying on the bed like mud. Although Zhang Hai's strength wasn't as strong as he wanted to be, dealing with 2 of them wasn't a problem. After dealing with these 2 guys, Zhang Hai went to the bathroom to wash up. There was a new set of things prepared for him. He didn't hold back. After washing up, he walked out of the room with the blanket he took from the rooftop yesterday. But just as he walked out, a woman wearing a maid uniform, who looked to be in her 20s, was already standing at the door waiting for him. Mr. Zhang Hai, these are your clothes, we have already washed them. The woman looked at Zhang Hai and said seriously. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai saw the clothes in her hand, so he immediately took the clothes with a smile. That wears Prawalton? After taking the clothes, Zhang Hai was ready to go back to change his clothes, but when he woke up in the morning, he only saw Kobe and Fail, which made Zhang Hai feel a bit strange, so he couldn't help but ask the maid. Master is dealing with official business in the study. Housekeeper Isabel is accompanying him in the study. Miss Cheryl Lee went out early. Miss Barbara is jogging outside. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the maid seriously said to Zhang Hai, "Oh, thank you." Hearing her words, Zhang Hai smiled, then nodded to her. "You're welcome. After you change your clothes, you can go to the study to find Master, or you can go to the dining room. The dining room where you ate yesterday. Breakfast is already prepared." Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the maid nodded to him again, then said respectfully. Hearing her mention the dining room, Zhang Hai's mind couldn't help but flash a bad image. Then he smiled and flashed into the room. After changing his clothes, he left the room again. He first went to the study to take a look outside and found that Walton seemed to be checking some documents. Zhang Hai didn't disturb her, but went directly to the dining room and had breakfast. He has to admit, he doesn't know if Walton is very careful, or the people in this manor are very careful. Zhang Hai is a Huaxia person, and his breakfast is also prepared in the Huaxia style. To be exact, it's a northeastern style. His breakfast today is a bowl of tofu pudding and a few fried dough sticks, which are not common in the United States. Zhang Hai tasted it. Well, this tofu pudding also tastes very good, salty and fresh. It's very good. Although the fried dough sticks are prepared in advance, they are still hot. The outside is crispy, but there is a trace of toughness inside, which is very delicious. After eating 5 fried dough sticks and a large bowl of tofu pudding, Zhang Hai is full. Then he went to Walton's study. Although he had a good time yesterday, he didn't forget that he still had something to do today. Walking into the study, Zhang Hai saw Walton and Isabel Roland. Isabel saw Zhang Hai come in, made a gesture to hush, and then motioned Zhang Hai to sit on the sofa over there. Zhang Hai is not a person who likes to make trouble, so he didn't say anything and sat on the sofa over there. Last night, after he and Isabel finished eating skewers, the two of them didn't get any closer to each other. Although they kept a certain distance from each other, after a heart-to-heart talk, the two of them were indeed closer than the other 4. Today, looking at Zhang Hai, Isabel's face flashed a trace of blush. She is not a natural lesbian. She became a lesbian because of Walton's needs and because she has no other choice. However, after having a relationship with Zhang Hai, she doesn't reject Zhang Hai, because she also likes that kind of love. "You're up. I thought you were going to sleep until the afternoon. What do you want to eat at noon? How about oysters? I heard that they are very nutritious for men. I have a batch of the best Ghidorah oysters in France here. I'll ask them to make it for you at noon. I've prepared a good show for you tonight. You have to be alert." Time passed by minute. After Walton finished correcting this document, he raised his head and looked at Zhang Hai with a chuckle and said to him, "Ahem, I don't think so. I told you before that I didn't come to Atlantic City to have fun. I have something to do." Hearing Walton say that there will be a good show in the evening, Zhang Hai was tempted for a moment, but he didn't come here to have fun. He still has something to do, so after hesitating for a moment, Zhang Hai still told her the truth. "Oh, you really have something to do? Is it convenient to tell me?" Hearing that Zhang Hai really has something to do, Walton couldn't help but look at him with some doubts and asked puzzledly. "It's not something that's convenient or inconvenient to say, but this is what the other party wants. I can only tell you that it's related to the royal family of the Middle East." Looking at Walton, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment and said no directly, but after all, the two are very close to each other, so close that they already know each other's depth, so Zhang Hai still revealed a little. "The royal family of the Middle East. Dufayman Viha Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum?" Hearing Zhang Hai mention the royal family of Dubai, Walton said a name almost instantly. Zhang Hai was shocked when he heard the name. "How do you know?" Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. This guy is too powerful. It's not hard to guess. 90% of the royal families in the Middle East are very low-key. They are very prestigious in their country, but abroad, they are only called the Middle Eastern Nouveau Riche. But among these low-key people, there will be some more high-profile ones, and the one who has been the most active recently is him. Walton said with a chuckle as she tapped the table gently with a pen in her hand. Recently, he first quietly talked about a business with Huaxia. Of course, this so-called quietly, in fact, everyone knows about it, and now he wants to see you. "Well, let me think, the business with Huaxia, is it related to you?" Are you from the Imperial Court? Walton bit the cap of the pen and asked Zhang Hai a little strangely. Damn, you are too good at deceiving people, but I am not from the Imperial Court, but this line was indeed pulled by me. You are not from the United States, are you? Hearing Walton's words, Zhang Hai was really shocked. From some sporadic fragments and his reaction, she probably figured out the situation of the matter. It seems that this woman is really not ordinary. At least in terms of IQ, it is not a problem for her to crush him. In fact, Zhang Hai is too lazy. When the Dragon Ball was transforming his body, it was also transforming his brain, but if he didn't develop it, then there was no other way. I am from the Walton family, but second, I am pro-Walton. The United States government, well, it has nothing to do with me, but you have to remember that you are now in the United States. This is something that can be used against you. Don't tell others easily, otherwise, someone will make things difficult for you. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Walton chuckled, and then said indifferently. Well, this time I'm going to solve the problem of how to fight back in case someone tries to make things difficult for me, or wants to take over my family business. Hearing what she said, Zhang Hai also seriously said to her. That's right. So confident? Then I will go with you. Looking at Zhang Hai's confident appearance, Walton chuckled. Okay. After thinking about it, Zhang Hai also nodded. Anyway, the deal between him and Du Feynman has already been agreed. He is not afraid of Walton interfering. Agreeing to let her follow is not bad for Zhang Hai. Where is the place? Seeing Zhang Hai agree, Walton also looked at Zhang Hai with interest. Caesar Palace. There is a UFC there today. That guy Du Feynman wants to see this thing, so he set the meeting place there. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai said a little bit. After all, in some TV dramas and novels before, he had heard the name of this casino a lot, but he had never been there once. It was really a loss of face for the rich. There. Okay, let's go after lunch. Looking at Zhang Hai's appearance, Walton chuckled. It seems that her little boyfriend still has a child's heart. Chapter 5:14. How is Atlantic City? Is it beautiful? Walton, who was lying in the passenger seat of Zhang Hai's battleshield and wearing sunglasses, asked Zhang Hai who was driving. Hearing her words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but nod gently. It's very beautiful, but there are too few people. Zhang Hai is telling the truth. The buildings in Atlantic City are beautiful, the roads are wide, and there is a bay next to it. It looks like a treasure land. It is also the second largest gambling city in the United States, and one of the top 4 gambling cities in the world. However, in Zhang Hai's opinion, this place is indeed a bit, well, too peaceful. There are very few people. Have you seen Atlantic Empire? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Walton turned to Zhang Hai and asked, but after hearing what she said, Zhang Hai nodded. Atlantic Empire is a very famous American TV series. Although he didn't finish watching it, he roughly watched it. Basically, it's about the founding of Atlantic City and the chaos of the Grey Gang here. After watching it for a long time, it became boring, so Zhang Hai didn't finish watching it. When Atlantic City was founded, it was just like Las Vegas. It was a normal city and had nothing to do with the gambling city. But in 1931, Las Vegas became a gambling city in order to revive the economy. After seeing the benefits of Las Vegas, Atlantic City also became a gambling city in the 1970s. But unlike Las Vegas, it's in the southwest, and this place is under New York. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Walton also said to Zhang Hai, it's nothing more than that after the founding of Las Vegas, the government is in charge, and after the founding of the Atlantic Empire, the real boss is the Grey Gang. What rules can the Grey Gang have? They rob people and customers everywhere. If they win money, they don't let others go. If they lose money, they let others go. This is the Grey Gang. It's precisely because of this that Atlantic City was very popular in the beginning. But in the 1980s, when airplanes became a common means of transportation, most rich people would rather go to Las Vegas than come here to play. When the tax revenue was reduced, the government reacted and began to vigorously attack the Grey Gang. Now, there are only a few rats in the entire Atlantic City. The Grey Gang was exterminated, even the foreign gangs, such as South U Gang, MO Gang, Latin American Gang, they were all wiped out. But the foundation built over the years is not easy for others to have confidence in. It's just like when the United States was reforming and opening up. There was a large-scale pollution of land and water, but that was many years ago. The land and rivers in the United States were already very clean, and some places even reached the standard of drinking water. But back then, the United States government said not to catch fish in the river to eat it. Everyone in the United States still abides by that. Otherwise, Asian carp wouldn't be as rampant as it is now, because they don't dare to eat it. It's the same in Atlantic City. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. The flow of people in Atlantic City is still lukewarm. There are many casinos, but more of them are closed than open. The total population of Atlantic City is only 50,000 people. It's hard to imagine that there are less than 50,000 people in a city. However, this was a place that many rich people liked to live in. This was because the environment here was very good. Plus, there weren't even any rats here, and the gray gang was even rarer. Living here was very safe. So there are many rich people living here. Along the way, Jiang Hai listened to Prawalton's introduction. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The population of the United States isn't very small. There are about 300 million people, but compared to Huaxia, it's really too vast and sparsely populated. Of course, the most sparsely populated place is Canada, where there aren't many people at all. Along the way, the sea breeze blew as they looked at the slightly gorgeous city. Jiang Hai and Prawalton arrived at their destination, the Caesar Palace Hotel. In fact, the hotel's reputation is much bigger than it actually is. Before the MGM Grand Hotel was built, it had always been the world's largest casino. The headquarters was in Las Vegas, and there was a branch in Atlantic City. Of course, the current Caesar Palace is also a first-class casino in the world, but it's not as famous. After all, there are many rich people who are purely in pursuit of greatness. Caesar Palace is far from it. For example, Golden Sand, Cloud Top, Venetian, Monte Carlo, etc. These are all big casinos. Their guests, their entertainment equipment, and their standards were not inferior to Caesar's. However, Caesar had a unique advantage, which was that it was the first choice for all the indoor gambling matches. The most famous one is boxing, and in addition to boxing, the UFC that Jiang Hai wants to watch this time is also the same. After parking the car in the underground parking lot of Caesar Palace, Jiang Hai walked into the casino with Prawalton. When they walked in, the two security guards hesitated for a moment, but they didn't say anything. Because in their view, Jiang Hai is definitely not dressed properly. After all, Jiang Hai likes to wear sportswear and outdoors. Over here, even if you didn't wear a suit, you would at least wear a casual suit. You would wear a shirt on the inside and a suit on the outside. Even if you didn't wear a tie, you could still wear a collar and leather shoes. To Westerners, this would be considered a set of formal attire. However, Jiang Hai is so casual, it really doesn't meet the standards of a guest, which makes the two security guards a little hesitant. The reason why they didn't stop Jiang Hai is because they know that Jiang Hai's car is worth millions of dollars, and Jiang Hai's watch is worth millions of dollars. These two alone are enough to blind their eyes. So they didn't say anything, and just watched Jiang Hai and the others go in. In the United States, the rich are the boss and there are not so many principals to speak of. When Jiang Hai and Prawalton walked into the casino, the situation inside really made Jiang Hai's eyes light up. The casino in front of him is divided into 3 parts, 2 large parts, and a small part. The small part is for exchanging chips. The medium part is mainly for playing slot machines. Of course, slot machines are not only one kind of machine, there are many kinds of machines, just like the game halls in China, but unfortunately, there is no catch fish. Jiang Hai has no idea how to play the 777 slot machine. The other part is the gambling table. On the gambling table here, the most played is blackjack, in addition to 5-card stud, asterisk 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 asterisk, baccarat, and so on. According to the bottom of the chips, the color of the table is different. Behind each table is a beautiful woman who acts as a dealer. Of course, in addition, there are many waiters and security guards patrolling here. Although it is only around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Jiang Hai and Prawalton came over after having lunch at her home. However, there are already a lot of people here. In addition, there is a special living room here. The UFC fight will start there, but now it is closed. According to the painting on the wall of the casino, the space can seat 18,000 people. It is almost the same size as an NBA stadium. It is said that the one in Las Vegas is bigger. In addition, there are many small private rooms, which are left for the rich to play by themselves. After Zhang Hai arrived here, he looked around. Although he wanted to try his luck, Zhang Hai did not forget his purpose of coming here. He took out his mobile phone and called Du Feimin. The phone was picked up after a few rings, and then Du Feimin's voice came from the phone. It was still so forthright and fake. "Hi, Zhang. You finally called me. Are you coming over?" Looking at the person displayed on the phone, Du Feimin said enthusiastically. Hearing Du Feimin's enthusiastic voice on the phone, Perwalton was stunned. Zhang Hai said that he is not very familiar with him, but now listening to his voice, it does not sound like they are not familiar with each other. "I'm already at the casino. Where are you?" Shrugging at Perwalton, Zhang Hai said that he has no other choice. Then he asked Du Feimin on the phone. "This guy has always been unreliable." "Me? I'm fighting. Haha, do you want to come over and join me?" Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin shouted excitedly. "Fight? Forget it." Glancing at Perwalton beside him, Zhang Hai thought that the fight, so it is better for him not to get involved. Perwalton on his side is very difficult to deal with. "That's a pity. I will ask my people to send you the tickets. You can play first. The fight starts at 7 o'clock. Your seat is next to mine. We will talk when we meet." Hearing that Zhang Hai is not interested in his fight, Du Feimin sighed helplessly, then told Zhang Hai to play by himself. In fact, the fight he is talking about is not the same as what Zhang Hai said. He is gambling, but even so, Zhang Hai is not willing to watch him gamble. If he wants to play, he can play here by himself. It is better for him not to get involved in the fights of the rich. After all, he is not really rich. Okay. After talking to Du Feimin, Zhang Hai also hung up the phone. Then he talked to Perwalton, and the two went to the side to exchange $200,000 in chips, ready to go their separate ways to play. Perwalton lives in Atlantic City, and she is also a descendant of a big family, so she is very familiar with these kinds of games. Whether it is for her or for Zhang Hai, the $100,000 is just pocket money. So, after each of them took the $100,000, the two of them went their own ways to play. Zhang Hai also gave it a try, but soon it was proven that he was not the child of the plane of existence or anything like that. The plot of killing everyone in the casino, making money, stepping on people, and picking up girls in the novel is not there at all. He really does not know how to play. Chapter 5:15. The dealer has 18 points. "Sir, I'm sorry you won." Looking at the J, Q, and 5 in his hand, Zhang Hai opened his mouth, but when he heard what the beautiful dealer said, he shook his head helplessly. Novels are really deceiving. What a scam. Watching the beautiful woman in front of him take away the $5,000 worth of chips on his table, Zhang Hai sighed and put in another $2,000. It seemed that he was going to die here. Actually, it wasn't a matter of whether he was going to die or not, but that this was the only game he knew how to play here. The way to win was the same for card stud and card stud. The biggest was a straight flush, followed by an iron stud, which was 4 the same kind, followed by a calabash, which was a triple pair, followed by a straight, a flush, a 3 of a kind, 2 of a kind, and a scatter. Those who had watched Hong Kong gambling movies will not be unfamiliar with this method. But the problem now was that the movies were all lies. Where did this straight flush come from? Bull*T, isn't it? Zhang Hai played 3 rounds. The biggest round was a 3 of a kind, but that was it. His opponent beat him with a small flush. If he played Texas, his hand would be even bigger, because there were 2 matching cards. Almost every hand had a flush, a straight, and even a calabash was very common. But it was obvious that Zhang Hai wasn't that lucky. After losing more than $30,000 on that table, Zhang Hai ran away dejectedly. Fortunately, he was only here to play and broaden his horizons. He wasn't going to stick his head in here. After losing $100,000, it was unlikely that he would come back again. As for Baccarat, he just stood there and watched. Then, when he realized that he didn't even understand the rules, he endured it. Then, he played blackjack, which was the only game he understood. Unfortunately, he still lost more than he won. What was the dealer's greatest skill? Protection. This was because she wasn't specifically targeting Zhang Hai. As long as she calculated that she could win this game, then she would stop. If she calculated that she couldn't win, then she would add more. This was also the reason why she didn't want to lose money as a banker. Zhang Hai was one of those losers. He only had $20,000 left of his $100,000. Mr. Zhang Hai, so you're here. I've been looking for you for a long time. Just as Zhang Hai was waiting for the cards to be dealt, a big man from the Middle East came over and looked at Zhang Hai respectfully. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but look at him with some surprise. I'm Do Feynman Weha Muhammad. Oh, I know. You're one of his men, right? Hearing that he was going to introduce himself and say Du Feynman's full name, Zhang Hai immediately waved his hand to stop him. What a joke. Who would listen to this? Hearing Zhang Hai's interruption, the man nodded and respectfully handed over an envelope. This is the admission ticket that Mr. Do Feynman prepared for you. There are 2 in total. We know that you came with a female companion. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai couldn't help but nod. It would be strange if Du Feynman didn't know that he came with a female companion. He didn't believe that the people in this hotel would monitor him here. Okay, I got it. By the way, how long will it take for Du Feynman to finish? He's in good health. He's been fighting for so long. Is he still fighting? Taking the envelope, Zhang Hai hesitated for a moment and asked the man. It mainly depends on the wishes of the other people and the financial situation of the other people. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he respectfully said to Zhang Hai. Hearing what he said, Zhang Hai was a little puzzled. Isn't he? Looking at the man, Zhang Hai moved his crotch, then raised his eyebrows and said to him. Oh, of course not. They are gambling in the VIP room. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the man from the Middle East said with a black face. If an ordinary person dared to say that to Du Feynman, he might have directly punched him. One must know that Du Feynman was a member of Dubai's royal family. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. As his subordinates, they understood the principle of death when their master was humiliated. However, they knew that Zhang Hai was their lord's friend. Therefore, they could only swallow their anger. They are gambling. Take me there to have a look. Zhang Hai now had the mentality of a tourist. After learning that Du Feynman was not there to do that thing, Zhang Hai also became interested. Okay, please come this way. The waiter knew that the relationship between Zhang Hai and Du Feynman was very close. Most importantly, Du Feynman had just invited Zhang Hai to watch his gambling, so he didn't mind letting Zhang Hai go again. Wait a minute. I'll go find my female companion. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai smiled, then glanced at the 2 cards in front of him, a 4 and an 8, adding up to 12 points. He definitely couldn't win with such cards, so he knocked on the table. With this knock, the dealer on the opposite side also took advantage of the opportunity to deal a card. When he saw Old K's ugly face, he knew that it was over again. Then he shook his head and stood up. He glanced around and saw Pro Walton at a German gambling table in the distance. He pulled this person to Pro Walton's side. After arriving here, Zhang Hai couldn't help but secretly click his tongue. He really didn't see that Pro Walton was actually a master. Zhang Hai's side was about to lose everything, but her side didn't fall but rose instead. Looking at the chips, in addition to the initial 100,000, she seemed to have won another 100,000. Seeing her return to her cold queen image after leaving Zhang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Because he felt that the money she won wasn't just because of her skills. Because at this moment, many men would unintentionally glance at her when they were looking at their cards. There was no other way, such a cold and noble woman, no man would dislike her. And Pro Walton was also sitting there, a pair of disdainful eyes glancing at the gambling table in front of her. When she looked at these men, she couldn't help but snort. What a group of disgusting guys. At this moment, the last card had appeared. Looking at the 5 cards on the table and the 2 in her hand, Pro Walton casually threw out $5,000 in chips. It seemed that she was quite confident in this round. Hee, $5,000, it's not a small amount, are you sure? Seeing her throw out $5,000, there were a total of 8 people on the table. At this time, 5 of them had already closed their cards, leaving only Pro Walton, a middle-aged man who looked like a refined scum, and an old man who looked like a nouveau riche. At this time, the middle-aged man said with a smile. If you don't follow, then close your cards. Hearing his words, Walton said indifferently. Close your cards? Oh no, I'm just telling you, you're going to lose money like this, beauty. Hearing Walton's words, the man also threw out $5,000 with a smile. The confident look on his face was really disgusting. Last round raise. At this moment, the dealer glanced at the three people who were still following and said indifferently, 10,000. Open your cards. Hearing this, Walton directly threw out $10,000 in chips again, and then said indifferently. The old man thought for a moment and closed his cards. In his opinion, these cards were not worth so much. Only the middle-aged man was still looking at Walton in front of him with a lustful gaze. $10,000. You're really generous. I'll follow this 10,000, but the upper limit of this table is only $10,000. It's not interesting. Why don't we bet outside? Looking at Walton, the man said with a smile. Huh. Looking at his proposal, Walton couldn't help but raise his head and look at him. What does this guy mean? We'll bet $100,000 for this round. If you win, the $100,000 is yours. But if you lose, do me the honor of having a meal with us. Many people couldn't help but gasp when they heard what the man said. $100,000 in exchange for a meal? Many women felt a little excited when they looked at this guy who looked like a gentleman. He was handsome, had a good temperament, and most importantly, was rich and domineering. He was really the perfect partner. Not interested. But unfortunately, he was facing Walton. Now, except for Zhang Hai, she was still full of hostility to other men, so after a disdainful snort, she pushed the cards forward and motioned for the dealer to open. As for the man, after seeing Walton's appearance, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, but this embarrassment only lasted for a moment, and then his face showed more and more interest in Walton. At this time, the dealer also opened the cards of the two. Walton's luck was not very good in this game. Although she got a gourd, the other party's cards were a bit harder. It was a straight flush. More than $20,000 on the table had changed owners in an instant. Seeing this scene, the man couldn't help but sigh. If Walton agreed to bet with him just now, would it mean that he might be able to get close to the beauty? But he didn't care. He always believed that there was no girl in the world that he couldn't flirt with. A cold beauty like Walton was nothing more than a matter of time. It was that simple. Lost. But at this time, a man's stinky hand suddenly put on the shoulder of the goddess in his heart, and then an Asian face appeared beside his goddess. Seeing this scene, the man's index finger couldn't help but twitch. I won, look. What made him even more unbearable was the attitude of his goddess. When she saw this man, the goddess who had always been cold suddenly smiled like a silly sweet girl, and showed off her victory like a little girl. Seeing this scene, the guy couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his heart. Too hateful. Chapter 5:16. Wow, that's amazing. At this time, only Zhang Hai could be tired of Walton. And the most important thing is that in Walton's heart, the only man who can be tired of is Zhang Hai. That's right, you don't know who I am. Hearing Zhang Hai's praise, Walton said with a smile as if she had eaten honey. Looking at her charming smile and beautiful eyes, the men who originally had a lot of improper thoughts about Walton heard the sound of their hearts breaking at this time, especially the middle-aged man opposite them. Tisk, I really don't have any talent in this game. I only have 10,000 left of my 100,000. Smacking his lips, Zhang Hai said with a smile, and then took out his only remaining chip. If you want to play, take it. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Walton also gave her chip to Zhang Hai. Xiao by face, king of soft rice. Seeing Walton's action, the men here secretly scolded Zhang Hai in their hearts. Forget it, I won't play. This is Du Feimin's man. He said that Du Feimin is gambling in the VIP box. I'm going to take a look. Do you want to come? Looking at Walton, Zhang Hai asked her. When they heard Zhang Hai's words, many people's hearts jumped. The VIP box is not a place where just anyone can enter. Although looking at Zhang Hai's nondescript appearance, he doesn't seem to be very rich. But he can go to the VIP box, which shocked the people next to him, and many of the resentful eyes at that time disappeared. Even the middle-aged man sitting opposite Walton also restrained his gaze. At least before he knew who Zhang Hai was, he didn't dare to easily offend Zhang Hai. But Zhang Hai and Prawalton ignored these gazes. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled, and then motioned to the dealer to change the money. The dealer quickly changed a check for $170,000 and handed it to her. But Zhang Hai didn't change his $10,000 chip. According to him, he wanted to take it back as a souvenir. The two of them left the table and followed Du Feimin's man to the VIP room. Looking at the backs of Zhang Hai and Prawalton, the people at the table continued to play while whispering, because they didn't know who Zhang Hai and Prawalton were, although Prawalton had been here before. But who is she? Would the little princess of the Walmart play in the lobby? So 95% of the time when she came here, she would go to the private room to play while talking about business. Sometimes, she would play outside to accompany her new girlfriend. She would play a few rounds in a very low-key way, and then leave. It was her first time playing like today. So it was normal for the person in charge of Caesar Palace to know her, but almost none of these individual guests knew her. No matter how the people outside talked about the two, they had already walked out of the lobby and went to the nearby private room area. The private room here was much stricter than the lobby. Not only did they have to go through the metal detector door like going through security, but there would also be people checking their packages. Fortunately, Zhang Hai was used to being checked in China. Prawalton didn't bring anything today except her mobile phone. After all, she was with Zhang Hai. She knew that Zhang Hai was also a rich man. It would be troublesome to go out with him with a wallet. She didn't bring her handbag either. For her, she only needed to put on makeup. There was no need to touch up her makeup. After the two passed through the security gate, Du Feimin's people took them to the outside of a lobby. After knocking on the door and getting permission, the person opened the door. Zhang Hai followed him in. As soon as they walked in, Zhang Hai saw a huge gambling table in the splendidly decorated room. In addition to the dealer, there were 4 other people sitting at the gambling table. A white man, a black man, an Asian man, and Zhang Hai's friend, Du Feimin. At this time, the chips in front of these people made Zhang Hai somewhat surprised. At the tables outside, there were chips of all sizes, with the smallest being $1. However, at the table where Zhang Hai and Prawalton were gambling, the minimum bet was $500, which meant that the smallest chip was $500. The smallest chip on the table for these people gambling here was 100,000. Fine, for the rich, this really wasn't a lot. Everyone had 1,000 chips worth $100,000 in front of them, which added up to $100 million per person. It was truly terrifying to be able to make $100 million just by playing cards. It wasn't that Zhang Hai didn't have $100 million, but he would have to be crazy to spend $100 million here. Hey, Zhang, you're finally here. Do you want to add a corner? Seeing Zhang Hai walk in with Prawalton, Du Feimin was stunned for a moment, then nodded at Prawalton before speaking enthusiastically to Zhang Hai. It seemed that he also knew Prawalton, which was understandable. Basically, there was no upper-class person in America who didn't know Prawalton. However, this little princess of the Walton family, who was now at the helm of Sam's Club, wasn't so easy to get along with. Her reputation wasn't very good. Of course, this so-called reputation wasn't referring to her private life. It was referring to the way she conducted herself. Her personality was quite strange, but she was extraordinarily capable. Coupled with the support of the Walton family, the world's largest business family, she only needed to show her ability. She didn't need to make any concessions or anything like that, and she could do quite well. As for her, many second-generation heirs and young masters had been warned by their families not to provoke her. Therefore, when Du Feimin saw her now, if she didn't take the initiative to express their relationship, then he wouldn't take the initiative to talk to her. Forget it. My money isn't used to waste. I really don't have any thoughts about the bet. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai shook his head. He was telling the truth. If he lost 90,000 yuan from 100,000 yuan, then he wouldn't be too distressed. However, if he lost 90,000 yuan from 100 million yuan, then he probably wouldn't be able to sleep for several nights. He would have to find a sunken ship to get it back up. However, with the blueprints he bought last time, he basically got all the ships that should be sunken. The remaining ships, if not small ships, were only worth 18 million yuan. Zhang Hai wasn't interested in them. They were just ships that sunk in awkward positions. For example, in the Cuban waters, or in the Colombian waters. If Zhang Hai wanted to go to these places, how could he guarantee his safety? Therefore, in the current situation where there wasn't much night grass, Zhang Hai had better eat it sparingly. Oh, that's a pity. This is a very fun game. You can do whatever you want. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin smiled, then sat back in his seat and began to play. Zhang Hai and Prawalton also sat behind him, looking at his cards. Seeing Prawalton sit down, the black man and the white man took the initiative to nod to Prawalton, but they also didn't speak. It was obvious that these two people also knew Prawalton. However, when the Asian man saw Zhang Hai and Prawalton, his expression was a little different. When he saw Zhang Hai, the main expression in his eyes was disdain and ridicule, but when he looked at Prawalton, his eyes flashed with a hint of amazement. It was obvious that he didn't know Zhang Hai or Prawalton. Even after Prawalton sat down, his eyes looked straight at Prawalton with a wretched face. "Hey, kid, do you want to play cards or watch something?" Looking at his appearance, the four people sitting there frowned. Only Prawalton's face didn't have any other expression, but this made Zhang Hai a little unhappy. But he didn't need to speak because the black man over there had already spoken. What a joke, offending the people of the Walmart group. Can they still play? Play cards. Hearing what the black man said, the kid smiled a little awkwardly and then looked at the card table. "It's your turn, what are you playing?" At this time, the white man also tapped the table gently and said disdainfully. Hearing his words, the Asian kid's face flashed a trace of anger, but then he remembered that this was the United States, not his territory, so he forced himself to suppress it, and then he threw 10 chips with a smile, which was $1 million. While throwing, he also looked at Prawalton. It was obvious that he really liked Prawalton. Seeing that he had already thrown the money, the others didn't say anything. They didn't care about $1 million. After throwing the money, the dealer continued to put the cards. This time, they were also playing a card game. Indeed, after this kind of game appeared, it was much more complicated. It was more attractive than the traditional 5-card stud. Nowadays, people who gambled on big cards preferred to play this way. The four people seemed to have a tacit understanding. Each card was worth $1 million. Soon, 3 rounds were over, 2 cards were dealt in the first round, 3 cards were shown in the second round, and 1 more card was added in the last round. 4 cards appeared on the table. Basically, it was clear whether the cards in everyone's hands could be formed. Looking at the cards on the table, Du Feimin's cards were a little scattered. But he could put together the last card to see if it was a club. In that case, he could try for a flush. But even a flush wasn't a big deal in a card game, so after hesitating for a moment, he put down the card. And when he put down the card, the Asian kid over there also laughed and said, Chapter 5:17. What's wrong? The Middle Eastern nouveau riche can also be scared? Looking at Du Feimin, the Asian guy couldn't help but laugh. I'm just here to have fun. My money doesn't grow on trees. Shrugging, Du Feimin didn't care about this kind of provocation. Of course, the latter sentence was taught to him by Zhang Hai. When he asked Zhang Hai to invest in Dubai, Zhang Hai often said this. Hearing his words, the Asian guy also laughed, then took out 10 million and threw it into the pool. Seeing him do this, the white guy also put down his cards, and only the black guy followed. When the last card was revealed, the Asian guy's face was even more proud. Holding 2 cards, he looked at the black guy in front of him with a smile. Of course, he kept looking at Prawalton from the corner of his eyes. In his opinion, there was no woman who didn't love money. He naturally had his reasons for being so rich. There are only 2 of us left. How about 20 million for a small round? Seeing him being so rich, the black guy over there smiled and took out 20 million and threw it on the table. The Asian guy also took out 20 million and threw it on the table. Then, the cards were revealed. The Asian guy's cards were indeed not small. On the cards, there was an ace, 2 jacks, and 2 kings. This guy had a jack and a king in his hand, which meant that no matter which one he used, it would be a king captive, gourd. Generally speaking, such a big card was enough to win, so when he showed his cards, he already smiled and signaled the dealer to give him the money. However, when the dealer showed the black guy's cards, his original smile instantly froze. The black guy's cards were very simple, a pair of jacks and a pair of aces. Although the top card of the ace card was not as good as his, this card was better than his king card. Seeing this scene, the Asian guy's face instantly turned green. Obviously, more than $30 million was not as easy as he said. He was also distressed to lose it just like that. "The money is mine." The black man grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. After glancing at the Asian with contempt, he smiled and motioned for the dealer to bring the money to him. In an instant, the money in front of him was much more than the other three. "Wow, you guys are playing big. 30 million in one go. 100 million won't last long." Seeing that the black man directly received tens of millions, Zhang Hai couldn't help but be a little stunned. These people are really ruthless. My assets will probably become negative after playing with them for a night. Fortunately, I'm not addicted to this thing, or else it would be troublesome. It wasn't this big before you came. The biggest one was only 3 million. However, after hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but smile and talk to him. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai also glanced at the Asian kid. Needless to say, this guy's purpose was pro Walton. Unfortunately, this round of 13 was not successful enough. Not only did he not get the girl, but he also lost more than 30 million. His face was green with fright. Cough, the one who won first is paper. Let's continue. Picking up the wine glass next to him and taking a big gulp, the kid pretended to be calm and said to the crowd. Then, he continued to throw a chip of 100,000, but his eyes didn't dare to look at Pro Walton so presumptuously. It seemed that the failure of the 13 just now still had some impact on him. The most important thing was that more than 30 million, his heart ached. Who are these people? Looking at the Asian, Zhang Hai whispered to Du Feimin. He is the third largest individual shareholder of Google and Google. He has some influence in the upper class of the United States, but he is a playboy and has no real power. He has a good relationship with everyone. The black man is Ofatrio Campos. He was originally a gray man in New York, but he stopped more than 10 years ago and opened a security company. Later, he invested in Blackwater International and is now the second largest shareholder of Blackwater International. His money may be the least among all the people here, but he is the one you can't provoke. Fortunately, this person is very well behaved and low-key. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin also introduced the three people here to Zhang Hai in a low voice. But he first introduced the white man and the black man. When Zhang Hai heard that the black man was actually a gray man, he couldn't help but frown and put a label on him that he couldn't be friends with. As for the Asian, he is a Korean. According to their country's name, he is called Li Jihao. He is a member of the Samsung Financial Group. The current leader of the Samsung Financial Group is his father. Du Feimin looked at the Asian and said with a smile. Among these people, when he introduced this person, he used the least words. It could be seen that Du Feimin didn't think highly of him. Indeed, there was a big gap between the rich people in the East and the rich people in the West. In the West, such as the United States, when your money reached a certain level, your existence would affect the political situation of the country. For example, Bill Gates. No American president would go against him. Sometimes, his words were more effective than the American president's. This was his power. But in the East, no matter if it was Korea, Japan, or Huaxia, the rich people were just substitutes in front of the government. The country needs you to have money and your own ability. Only then can you be qualified to be rich. This was the biggest difference between a gold-based society and an official-based society. Even in China, people were shouting about how capable they were and how much money they had. But as long as the imperial court gave the order, even the most powerful person would have to kneel down. This was similar to the Soviet Union. In the past, in order to develop Soviet Russia, the Soviet government had created a lot of oligarchs. But now, Soviet Russia's financial situation had stabilized, and these oligarchs became the public enemy. This was the official definition of the imperial court in Soviet Russia. So, Soviet Russia took action against these oligarchs. Once these oligarchs fell, the country would take back their money, factories, and power. So, in Huaxia and Soviet Russia, having money was useless. Power was the most important thing. Otherwise, even a village chief could kill you like a pig. Although Japan and Korea were not like Huaxia, their situation was not good. At least, they were not as arrogant as the rich people in the US. To the Koreans, the young master of the Samsung conglomerate was a big name. But to Du Feynman and the others, it was just a small matter. They didn't need to be on good terms with him for what they wanted to do. He was only here to accompany the guests. Of course, Li Zhihao did not think so. At this moment, he did not look like a guest. Instead, he looked like the main character. Of course, if it was in the US, the most powerful person at the table was Perwalton, who was beside Zhang Hai. After all, this guy represented Walmart Group, the world's #1 group. It was not as simple as just saying. Under the attention of Zhang Hai and the rest, Li Zhihao was a far cry from these old foxes in front of them. Originally, these old foxes did not care if they lost or won 2 or 3 million. They treated it as a way to pass time and accompany them to play. But now, since this guy was looking for death, they could not blame them. In the third round where Zhang Hai and the rest were sitting, this guy lost again. This time, he lost more than 20 million. This time, the 100 million in front of him was only left with 40 million. It was less than 50 million. His face was even more purple. In the 7th round, he lost again. This time, he was only left with 30 million. Looking at his reddened eyes, Zhang Hai could not help but feel a little funny. This might be a sign of addiction. In the 11th round, the white man casually said a few words to provoke him. After that, he bet the rest of his money. The result was self-evident. If they were not sure of winning, why would these old foxes be so fierce? At the moment when the cards were revealed, this guy's face was also pale. He was indeed the eldest son of Samsung and the only son of the current head of Samsung. But since he was born in 1990, he was 2 years younger than Zhang Hai. With such a big family like Samsung, the internal strife within the family was naturally difficult to resolve. There were plenty of people eyeing their positions. And with his family's style, it was naturally impossible for them to be like some idiot families who raised their children to be hedonistic or second-generation heirs. But which young man was not arrogant? Especially since he could do whatever he wanted in South Korea. But he also knew that although this $100 million was nothing to his family, if he lost it all, he would not be able to avoid a scolding. In a situation like this where people were afraid of losing, they would want to win back. And winning back also required capital. So his eyes instantly turned red and he was ready to take out another 100 million. But just as he was about to ask the dealer to give him the money, a person behind him who looked like a bodyguard patted him on the shoulder and said a few words in his ear. Hearing this person's words, the redness in his eyes gradually receded. Forget it. I'm not lucky today. I'll treat this 100 million as entertainment for you. I'm leaving. After slamming the table, Li Zhihao stood up and was about to walk out with a relaxed expression. But after just a few steps, he suddenly stopped and walked to Perwalton, who was still sitting there. I think you're quite bored sitting here. Why don't we go downstairs for a drink? Looking at Perwalton, Li Zhihao chuckled, then elegantly made a gesture of invitation and looked at Perwalton. But unfortunately, Perwalton would not spoil him and said coldly, I advise you to go see an ophthalmologist. I have a male companion. Oh, I don't think your male companion will mind. Hearing her words, Li Zhihao smiled disdainfully, glanced at Zhang Hai next to him, and said contemptuously. He heard Du Feynman's introduction just now. Perhaps the name of Samsung could not shock those black and white people in the United States, but it was not a problem to shock an Asian face. Chapter 5:18. Oh, are you a fart that I let out? You know my thoughts so well. But just as he was feeling smug, a mocking voice suddenly came from the side and entered his ears. Needless to say, the person who spoke was Zhang Hai. After hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman, as well as the other 2 Americans, laughed. They had to admit that Zhang Hai's words were quite lethal. Even Perwalton couldn't help but laugh. Kid, you're quite arrogant. You don't pay attention to what you say. Aren't you afraid of dying outside? Hearing Zhang Hai's words and the laughing faces of the people around him, the original smile on Li Zhihao's face disappeared in an instant. He stood up again and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Zhang Hai. For him, Du Feynman, the white man, and the black man, he didn't dare to provoke him. A nameless Asian dared to be so arrogant and even dared to insult him. You're courting death. Kid, to my friend. Hearing his almost blatant threat, Zhang Hai didn't say anything, but Du Feynman had already stood up. For a Middle Eastern tycoon like him, What he cared about the most was his face. This guy threatened Zhang Hai. Wasn't that making him lose face? Was there anyone at the table who didn't know that Zhang Hai was his friend? But before he could finish his words, Zhang Hai had already patted him on the shoulder, then looked at him playfully. With a look of contempt on his face, he said to him, "Oh? Are you threatening me?" "That depends on what you think." Hearing Zhang Hai's direct retort, Li Jihao's supercilious character, which he had cultivated in South Korea, made him take a step forward and look at Zhang Hai with tit for tat. He, Li Jihao, wasn't someone that any Tom, Dick, or Harry could bully. However, he thought that he wasn't someone that others could bully. But sorry, Zhang Hai wasn't someone that others could bully either. Especially since they dared to threaten him in front of him. Zhang Hai had no intention of indulging them. "Oh, if that's the case, I've fought with your mother before. Although your mother's skills are good, her plastic surgery was too much. Although I only spent one night with her, I'm still someone who has been through her front door and back door. When you see me, shouldn't you call me daddy or something like that?" Crossing his legs, Zhang Hai raised his head and looked at Li Jihao in front of him. Zhang Hai said slowly with disdain, "You bastard, what did you say?" Hearing that Zhang Hai dared to insult his mother in such a blatant manner, Li Jihao could no longer tolerate it. Originally, he was like a crown prince in South Korea. He didn't provoke others. Since when did someone dare to point at his nose and say such things in front of him? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, the expressions of the three people at the table changed. The black man and the white man looked at Zhang Hai with some worry. As for Du Feimin, he was just watching the fun. With his friendship with Zhang Hai, in addition to the relationship between Zhang Hai and the imperial court, this time, it was Zhang Hai who pulled the strings and built the bridge, and Zhang Hai's capital. In South Korea, Zhang Hai would be dead for sure. However, this was the United States. Even if he was given 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to do anything to Zhang Hai. Moreover, Zhang Hai had Prawalton by his side. Do I need to repeat what I said again? Little bastard. Seeing that Li Jihao was about to go crazy, Zhang Hai still said disdainfully. Hearing that Zhang Hai still dared to say such things, Li Jihao also went crazy. He went up and punched Zhang Hai's face. With this punch, everyone in the room, except for Zhang Hai, stood up, especially Prawalton. He dared to hit Zhang Hai in front of her. She thought that this guy didn't want to stay in the United States anymore. However, before she said anything, Zhang Hai waved his hand and stopped him. He touched his cheek. What a joke. His physical fitness was 4 times that of an ordinary person. Li Jihao's punch was almost like scratching an itch. Hey, you hit me? Touching his face, Zhang Hai stood up. With a height of more than 1.9 meters, he looked at Li Jihao condescendingly, but his eyes were full of ridicule. Seeing that Zhang Hai still dared to be so arrogant, Li Jihao also stared back. I not only dare to hit you, I also dare to kill. Looking at Zhang Hai, he said word by word, but unfortunately, before he finished speaking, Zhang Hai instantly backhanded him. With a loud bang, a backhand slap heavily on his cheek. After Li Jihao was slapped 720 degrees in the air, he fell heavily to the ground. At the moment of landing, before his brain could react, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't get me wrong. This was not an internal injury. Zhang Hai just had a strong physical fitness. He didn't know how to use force to hit. His slap directly knocked out a few of this guy's big teeth. The white fragments that were spat out with the blood were these teeth. Looking at Li Jihao, who was lying on the ground and completely stunned, Zhang Hai would not let him go easily. He pulled the corner of his mouth and quickly walked over, but Li Jihao didn't come alone. He still had 3 bodyguards. When they saw the conflict between Li Jihao and Zhang Hai, they were already on guard. When Li Jihao hit Zhang Hai, they would definitely not help. If they saw that Zhang Hai had any intention of fighting back, it would be time for them to take action. Unfortunately, Zhang Hai moved too fast. They didn't see what was going on at all, and Li Jihao was already lying on the ground. Seeing that Zhang Hai was still not going to let Li Jihao go, these people, under the command of a middle-aged man, instantly rushed towards Zhang Hai. However, they just took a step and forced themselves to stop there. Let's see who dares to move. The one who spoke was Du Feimin, because at this time, the bodyguards behind Du Feimin instantly pulled out their guns. It was originally a very simple thing for bodyguards to carry guns, But in the VIP room of Caesar Palace, bodyguards were not allowed to carry guns. This was the most basic rule, but there were always exceptions. Rules were created to be broken. Du Feynman was not an ordinary Middle Eastern local tyrant. He was the royal family of Dubai, and he had the right to not trust the people in Caesar Palace. If he lost a hair here, it would easily cause a diplomatic dispute. All Americans knew what kind of people the United States was. If there was a dispute between Caesar Palace and the royal family of Dubai, the higher-ups would probably give up on them. They didn't even need to hold a meeting. Therefore, if these royal families and princes came here to play, they would use their own bodyguards, and they were also allowed to carry guns. Of course, if something happened, these royal families and princes would pay for it themselves. Although they knew that Du Feynman was unlikely to shoot, these bodyguards couldn't afford to gamble. What if he shot? They didn't dare to kill Li Jihao, but if they killed them, although there would be trouble, it shouldn't be difficult to settle. There was no shortage of heroes in this world, but they really didn't think that they would be so stupid to rush up and be killed. At this time, Jiang Hai had already walked to Li Jihao's side and bent down to look at him on the ground. At this time, Li Jihao shook his head and was more or less awake. When he raised his head and saw Jiang Hai, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes, followed by great resentment. He couldn't help but spit a mouthful of bloody phlegm on the ground. Looking at Jiang Hai, this guy was still angry and shouted loudly, "Let me tell you, if you dare to hit me, you're dead. You're declaring war on the Samsung Lee family of South Korea. You're destined to die a horrible death." However, what greeted him was Jiang Hai's smiling face. He continued as if he didn't hear him. "It seems that I have to go to South Korea when I have time. Now that I see you, I think of your mother again. That old fox's skills are really good. I heard that you have a younger sister. I haven't played with mother and daughter yet. When the time comes, I must give it a try." "You beast!" Hearing that Jiang Hai dared to insult his mother and sister in front of him, although his mother had divorced his father, he couldn't tolerate it. He forced himself to get up and swung his fist at Jiang Hai again. Jiang Hai was still punched in the mouth, but other than leaving a bloody mark, there was nothing else. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai instantly raised his foot. Li Jihao flew out and directly hit the wall behind him. This time, Jiang Hai couldn't play with him because he hit the wall too hard and directly fainted. However, Jiang Hai estimated that this kick of his would make Li Jihao lie in the hospital for at least 10 days to half a month. "You dare to be so arrogant with this little skill? If it weren't for my soft-heartedness, you would have been beaten to death." He walked in front of Li Jihao. As they said, Jiang Hai didn't dare to really kill him. If he killed him, it would be a diplomatic dispute. Although Jiang Hai deliberately let him make the first move and it was caught by the camera, this was considered a legitimate defense. However, if his defense was excessive and he accidentally killed someone with his current ability, there would still be some trouble. "Hey, you are still soft-heartedness? Shameless, but I like your character very much. Let's go. Since the bet is not established, and you have no intention to get involved, then let's go eat. After eating, we will watch the competition. However, I feel that you should be stronger than those who fight in the UFC. TSK, really good." Seeing Jiang Hai stand up again and walk back, Du Feynman also smiled and signaled his bodyguards to put away their guns. The 3 bodyguards on the other side knew that they couldn't take revenge today. After glancing at Jiang Hai and Du Feynman, they quickly helped Li Jihao and ran out of the private room. Although Jiang Hai had a sense of propriety, nothing must happen to the Samsung Crown Prince. After leaving Caesar's palace, everyone drove directly to the nearby hospital. As for Jiang Hai, he followed Du Feynman and Perwalton to the restaurant here. The steak in the restaurant was also from Jiang Hai's manor, but they bought it from Perwalton. The taste was still very good, especially for Du Feynman. It was really different every time he ate it. After dinner, Du Feynman, Jiang Hai, and Perwalton went to the hall over there, ready to watch the UFC. Chapter 519. Is this fun to watch? Walking into the hall, after Jiang Hai and Du Feynman sat in the front row, Jiang Hai asked Du Feynman next to him. To be honest, this was the first time he came to watch this thing, so he really didn't understand it. If you like to watch ground fighting, then it's quite interesting. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked at the hall in front of him. The hall they were in at this time was really not small. In addition to an octagonal iron cage in the middle, chairs and other things were placed not far from the periphery. There were many seats, but to be honest, there were a lot of people who came to watch. According to Du Feimin's introduction, this thing was just like boxing. If it wasn't a boxing championship or a focused battle, there wouldn't be many people who would buy tickets to watch it. He just happened to be in time, so he came to take a look. But even so, the ticket price for their first row was $1,600. Hearing this price, Jiang Hai couldn't help but secretly click his tongue. These people really dared to ask for money. They even dared to charge so much for a broken chair. In fact, Jiang Hai was not ignorant about the UFC. At least before he came, he deliberately looked it up. The full name of the UFC was Ultimate Fighting Championship. It was a new type of fighting competition. In Chinese, it is the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It is currently the world's top and largest professional MMA event. This fighting competition was established for a very short time. It was just established in 1993, and its headquarters were in Las Vegas. The concept of this fighting competition was inherited from Bruce Lee's fighting philosophy, but the Real Foundation was the representative family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the Gracie family. However, they were no longer the only big family. Among them, Muay Thai, Karate, Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, wrestling, kickboxing, and other fighting events were also introduced into the competition. It could be said that this competition was the most unruly competition. Aside from headbutting, gouging eyes, pulling hair, stuffing hands or feet into the opponent's mouth, biting, kicking vitals, picking nostrils and ears, twisting fingers, striking vertically downward with the tip of the elbow, such as jumping up and striking the opponent's head with the tip of the elbow, attacking the spine and the back of the head, attacking the opponent's kidneys with the heel, grabbing the throat, grabbing the collarbone, and kicking the opponent's head when they are down. Other actions were allowed. Of course, taunting, spitting at the opponent, or insulting the opponent was not allowed. After all, this was graduation. The ones fighting were athletes, not ordinary hooligans. It could be said that they had the least number of rules among all the fighting competitions. However, because it was not an Olympic event, Huaxia itself did not place much importance on this kind of gambling competition. It was precisely because of this that Huaxia Kung Fu, which was known as one of the 4 major fighting techniques in the world, did not have much of a reputation on the stage. No Chinese were willing to fight, so there were not many Chinese people who came to watch. This thing was different from the WWE. Although the WWE was fake, there was one thing that was different. They had a storyline. Watching this thing was like watching a TV series, so it could attract a large number of fans in China. In the future, if they acted in TV series or movies, it would not be too sudden. After all, there was Dwayne Johnson. However, the UFC was different. This competition was very popular in Europe and the United States, but almost no one cared about this competition in China. However, as more and more people in Huaxia began to pay attention to the lethality of martial arts, some people entered this competition. The most famous one was Grassland Wolf Zhang Taiquan. His fighting strength was quite good, but because of the limitation of his body size, his results were not good. Therefore, although his record was not bad, it was not particularly good. However, with his participation, some people from Huaxia also joined this organization. According to Du Feimin's introduction, the people who competed here would not earn less than ordinary boxers. Of course, this referred to the people in the middle and lower levels. The top level of boxing was the world's largest gambling event. For people like Zhang Taiquan, the appearance fee for a competition was 100,000 euros, not including the prize money for winning. If they won all 4 fights in a year, their annual income would easily exceed 600,000 euros. If they fought in a focused fight or a belt defense fight, they would earn more, and there would also be a TV commission. However, if you were to compare yourself with Mayweather and the others, you would still be far behind them. After all, they could earn hundreds of millions of dollars just by fighting once a year. That was no joke. And that didn't even include the endorsements. What kind of nonsense was that? However, although these people had some fame in the UFC and some fans abroad, there were still too few people in China who knew them. Even some third-rate stars were more famous than them. Today's UFC fight was just an ordinary fight night. It wasn't a championship fight. While Jiang Hai and Du Feimin were chatting, the match had unknowingly started. The first fight of the day was a light heavyweight fight. The two sides were a white man named Misa and a black man named Daniel Jolin. This was the first time that Jiang Hai had seen such a fight. However, it was obvious that Daniel was better at boxing and standing attacks, while Misa was better at fighting on the ground. And that was the truth. After the first round began, the two of them started fighting. It was important to note that UFC fights were basically only 3 rounds, and each round was 5 minutes long. As long as the referee did not stop the fight, the two fighters could continue to attack. This was also the most popular attraction here. This person called Misa wasn't weak at all. However, he was indeed no match for Daniel when he was standing and attacking. But when the two of them fell to the ground, the situation instantly changed. Daniel struggled to break free from Misa's ground combat, but he was careless and once again fell to the ground. Misa was lying on Daniel's body, and his fists were like raindrops, falling on Daniel's face. At first, Daniel was still defending, but these people were very good at short-range attacks. After a few blows, Daniel was already stunned. The referee immediately stepped forward to stop the fight. TKO meant that the referee determined that the fight could not continue. It was also a type of KO, but it was not as obvious as a KO. As the referee stopped the fight, Misa was also victorious. Looking at the fight in front of him, Du Feimin was very excited, but Jiang Hai frowned slightly. He did not care much about this kind of fight. This might have something to do with the tyrannical gene in his heart. He did not like to fight on the ground. Indeed, if he wanted to, the average person would not have the chance to fight on the ground. He could go up and beat the opponent directly. This was his strength. So after watching 2 fights, Jiang Hai was a little bored. He asked Du Feimin, "Where is the thing I want?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin turned his head and looked at Jiang Hai. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not seem to be interested in the fight, Du Feimin shrugged helplessly. "Are you that anxious?" "Yes, there is nothing to watch. If these 2 people fight together, I can beat them in a minute." Hearing Du Feimin's words, Jiang Hai shrugged and said indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin could not help but be speechless. Sports competitions were like this. Why did people like to watch them? First, because sports competitions were very hot-blooded, known as the battlefield of the peaceful era. Second, it was because these were things that people wanted to do but could not do. Ordinary people attached their own wishes to these athletes. Watching them compete, they reminisced about their dreams. This was why sports competitions were so attractive. However, if a person's strength surpassed the level of these people, they would not have the leisure to watch. Sometimes they might be bored and turn on the TV to watch, but most of the time, they would not pay attention to it. Take Jiang Hai for example. He used to like playing basketball, but when he found out that he was better than anyone, he lost interest in it, including the UFC fight in front of him. Well, your life is really boring. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin shrugged gently. Then, he took a safe from the bodyguard next to him and stuffed it into Jiang Hai's arms. After Jiang Hai took the safe, he also checked the things inside. It was indeed what he wanted, the oil futures transfer contract. The style, paper, and even the words on it were exactly the same as the 2 in his hands. The only difference was the number. The original 400 million, 600 million, now became 1 billion. Seeing that the numbers were all correct, Jiang Hai closed the safe with a smile. Then, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Du Feimin. After taking the paper, Du Feimin glanced at it. It was the transfer contract of the jewelry that Jiang Hai stored in Miami. This time, the 2 of them did not owe each other anything. Du Feimin, I'm a little confused. You are a very smart person, but why would you let me take advantage of this? Since the contract was in his hands, Jiang Hai would not hand it over again. But at this time, he was a little confused. Why would Du Feimin let him take advantage of this? He did not understand. After all, these 2 things were not equal. I have 2 reasons. First, I really want this batch of jewelry to be useful. You also know that we don't have much oil in Dubai, so we need to make money from other sources. Tourism has always been our top priority, but there are many rich people who are willing to come here to play, but there are too few who are willing to settle here. Moreover, we don't have any famous tourist attractions in Dubai other than the Sailing Hotel. Originally, I was worried about how to continue developing, but this batch of antiques and jewelry that you brought suddenly gave me a burst of inspiration. If I put a sunken ship full of antiques and jewelry in our bay, do you think there will be fewer people willing to come here to play? Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin explained to Zhang Hai with a smile. Chapter 520. That's also true. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth. It was really difficult for him to understand the world of the rich. Spending $1 billion to get these jewels from the sea and then throwing them back into the sea. Using this to attract tourists to dive and play. Well, Zhang Hai didn't know if it was right or wrong, but it was indeed a good project. If he went to Dubai, and someone told him that there was a sunken ship full of real treasure at the mouth of the bay, and that he could sneak in for $100, he would probably go too. In that case, Dubai had an annual traffic of about 70 million people, according to the airport statistics. If 1 out of 10 people went to play, that would be 7 million people. If each person paid $100, that would be $700 million. If he could make $700 million in 1 year, he would be profitable in 2 years. Of course, this was all a matter of course. If only 1 out of 100 people went, there wouldn't be that many people. But ships didn't cost much. If they broke, they could be replaced at any time. The jewels wouldn't break either. This was a way to make money with almost no cost. The only person in the world who could easily collect a large number of antiques and real jewels at a low price seemed to be Zhang Hai. Zhang Hai believed in his first idea because it was really a way to make money. Zhang Hai even wondered if he could learn from Winthrop and get a sunken ship or a warship. The United States didn't have a lot of other things, but there were plenty of warships. After all, warships needed to be maintained and replaced. During World War II, the United States launched many ships in a month and used numbers to flatten the Pacific Fleet of Japan. After the end of World War II, nuclear power became the new power source. Too many ships with conventional power had reached the age of retirement. Most of them were thrown to coastal cities. Some with a sense of history were turned into museums, such as the one Zhang Hai saw in Boston. Some ordinary ships were either melted down or abandoned. These ships were very cheap. A destroyer could be bought for hundreds of thousands of dollars. After all, those were all scrap iron, but if these scrap iron were to be brought to Winthrop, it would be a perfect tourist attraction. It wasn't easy to come into contact with a warship in China, but here, if they could visit it for $1, many people would be willing to spend the money. On the other hand, diving, catching fish, and searching for treasure, $100 was simply a good price. Well, I almost believed you, but what's the second reason? After thinking for a while, Zhang Hai turned his head and looked at Du Feimin beside him and continued to ask him. Hearing Zhang Hai's second reason, Du Feimin smiled. I remember you said that you invited me to your manor as a guest. Then let's go tomorrow. I'll tell you later. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin said to Zhang Hai with a smile. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai was stunned. Originally, he had invited Du Feimin over just to be polite. However, he didn't expect that Du Feimin would really come. Moreover, it seemed that Du Feimin was interested in his manor. Okay. Although curious about why Du Feimin wanted to come, Zhang Hai still nodded and agreed. That's really great. After we watch the game, I'll set up a team here. We can have some fun, and then leave together tomorrow morning. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin looked at Zhang Hai with a gaze that all men understood, and then smiled slyly. Zhang Hai was just about to agree, but Prawalton, who had been sitting beside him, kicked him lightly. Looking at Prawalton, who was sitting upright, Zhang Hai really didn't expect that she had been listening to their conversation. However, Zhang Hai didn't care. Since she was here, he didn't mind letting her know some details. This might not be possible. I'll come to you tomorrow morning. I have a date with a beautiful woman tonight. After Zhang Hai finished speaking, he tilted his head and looked at Prawalton. This made Du Feimin slap his forehead, as if he just remembered her. Zhang, you're a lucky guy. The Walton family is just like the Abu Dhabi consortium in our world. Although they keep a low profile, their strength is unimaginable. If you really want to be with Miss Prawalton, whether it's a blessing or a blessing, you have to decide for yourself. Du Feimin shrugged at Zhang Hai and said to him with a smile. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai also touched his nose. Indeed, He also knew that Du Feynman was doing this for his own good, but between him and Perwalton, there were some inexplicable feelings. But he was also very clear that between him and her, there shouldn't be too much of a connection. After all, the concepts and thoughts of the two were completely different. They might really be together because they needed each other. After chatting with Du Feynman for a while, before the game was over, Jiang Hai had already left with Perwalton. After locking the box into the compartment of the car, Jiang Hai and Perwalton drove back to the Walton Manor. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her, Perwalton hesitated for a moment and said to him, "Jiang, I don't know if you will believe me. This Du Feynman is not as simple as he looks." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was driving, also smiled. Sure enough, she heard the conversation between them. "I know, I have never thought of him as simple." Nodding, Jiang Hai was very sure that he would not underestimate Du Feynman. Although this guy usually pretended to be stupid, in fact, Jiang Hai never knew what this guy was thinking. But he only knew that this guy didn't like to use his brain, so he was a little stupid. In his eyes, people all over the world were a little stupid, but this guy was pushed out by the Dubai royal family to become the spokesperson of Dubai. This meant that this person was definitely one of the smartest people in the Dubai royal family. If you treated these royal family and these people as fools, it was possible that in the end, he would swallow you whole. It's good that you think so. I'm just reminding you. Seeing that Jiang Hai's words didn't seem to be perfunctory, Perwalton didn't continue to speak. She also didn't ask Jiang Hai what he got, nor did she ask Jiang Hai what he paid. He had to admit that this woman, who knew when to advance and retreat, was really smart. At least, she understood people's hearts better than Jiang Hai. If it were him, he probably wouldn't be able to hold back his curiosity and ask. But sometimes, when this question was asked, it would cause a rift. Moreover, he and Perwalton weren't that familiar with each other. Then Perwalton took the initiative to change the topic, starting with the night scene of Atlantic City. Yes, it was already night. Speaking of Jiang Hai's beef, Jiang Hai also said that he also raised sheep and donkeys, which were all excellent breeds of Huaxia. This made Perwalton a little curious. She wanted to taste the Huaxia protected breeds that Jiang Hai mentioned. The only pity was that these protected breeds couldn't be promoted, and only Jiang Hai ate them. The two talked as they drove. Not long after, the car had already stopped in front of Perwalton's villa. After the car stopped, Isabel Roland was already standing respectfully in front of the car, wearing a set of official's uniform. She took Jiang Hai and Perwalton, and then led the two into the villa. As soon as they walked through the door, Jiang Hai heard a burst of voices in the villa's hall. Although they were speaking English and their accent was a little strange, Jiang Hai could hear that there were about 20 women's voices. He couldn't help but look at Perwalton beside him. Perwalton just smiled and didn't say anything. She continued to lead Jiang Hai in. When the three of them walked into the hall, Jiang Hai saw that there were more than 20 women in the hall at this time. However, those 20-plus girls were all of Asian descent. Their appearances were more or less the same. They had large cartoon-like eyes, sharp chins, high noses, long straight hair, slender necks and beautiful collarbones. Furthermore, even though they were wearing clothes, their clothes were very simple and unadorned. Their deep cleavage, small waists and long white legs were exposed. Among them, the most eye-catching feature was Cheryl Lee's slightly round face. As for the rest of the women, to be honest, Jiang Hai thought that they were all about the same. What's this situation? Looking at the group of women in front of him, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why did she call him back so anxiously for this? He looked at Perwalton. What is this little girl trying to do? Didn't you say that you haven't tasted these Korean girls yet? Today, I'll let you have a good taste. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Perwalton slowly walked behind Jiang Hai. She wrapped her arms around Jiang Hai's waist and looked at him. Hey, this is a bit too much. Looking at the women in front of him, Jiang Hai felt his scalp go numb. Is she trying to kill me? He was already feeling a little powerless when it came to fighting 1 against 6, let alone 20? What kind of joke is this? These women were all specially found by Cheryl. I heard that they were all streamers in South Korea. They have sweet voices, good figures, and can even dance. This is a gift that I've meticulously prepared for you. Don't be a killjoy. Let's see where your limit is. Alright, ladies, I believe Cheryl has already told you the purpose of your visit today. Let's move. Following Perwalton's order, the women in front of her quickly made their battle preparations. Hey! At this time, Jiang Hai was still not ready. Just as he said that, the women had already pounced on him. Chapter 521. Hissa! The next morning, when Jiang Hai walked out of Perwalton's manor, he actually couldn't walk properly. In northeastern terms, he was having a hard time walking. Looking back at the villa, Jiang Hai sighed. Last night's experience was indeed not bad. But if he did it a few more times, he probably wouldn't be far from the middle of his lifespan. Those Southern Korean girls were more than a little crazy. At first, someone even asked him if he wanted to wear a raincoat, and Perwalton said, "Whoever gets pregnant with Jiang Hai's child will be rewarded with $10 million. In an instant, the girls went crazy. They used any part of their bodies to help Jiang Hai. This was indeed a feeling that Jiang Hai had never experienced before. These Southern Gaoli girls were indeed in good shape. Although they all looked about the same, to be honest, they were very much in line with the current aesthetic standards. They had big eyes, sharp chins, high noses, small mouths, white and tender skin, and their somewhat unscientific upper body and waist. It was really a little surprising. According to them, their waist only had this effect after they lost 2 ribs. As for the rest, it would depend on training and the like. Just as Perwalton said, Jiang Hai was just fighting with them, not marrying them. In the past, Jiang Hai always felt that girls like this were no different from high-end blow-up dolls. But then he thought about it. High-end dolls would cost around 80 to 100,000 in China. He might not even be able to spend that much on a wife. Of course, if he met some weird people who wanted a house, a car, or a RV, that would be another matter. But basically, many families didn't sell girls. Since the conditions of the 2 families were similar, it was basically a 50-50 split. There wasn't much to pay attention to. Most importantly, a wife who spent so much money to marry really wasn't as good-looking as them. But that night, Jiang Hai was almost done for. He didn't sleep at all. Since he came back last night, he had been free until now. He limped to his car, started the engine, and left helplessly. "Miss, are you going to let her go just like that?" At this time, in a room on the 2nd floor, Isabel Rowland slowly walked to Perwalton, who was standing by the window and watching Jiang Hai leave, and asked her. "He's destined not to belong to me. Perhaps it's better for us to just have these crazy memories." Through the gap between the curtains, Perwalton watched Jiang Hai's car driving away without any expression on his face. "Miss." Hearing Perwalton's words, Isabel Rowland couldn't help but sigh, and then hugged Perwalton from behind. She did this to let Perwalton feel her presence. Perwalton gently patted her on the arm. She had already felt what she wanted to express. Jiang Hai. Jumping over Perwalton's body, Isabel also looked at Jiang Hai's car in the distance. Isabel didn't know how to feel about the person who took away her body, but she knew that this feeling made her feel a little reluctant when she watched Jiang Hai leave. But when she thought of Jiang Hai, she felt a little sweet in her heart. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know that 2 women were watching him leave. After leaving the manor, he went to the Caesar Palace he went to yesterday. Because he had already made an appointment with Du Feynman, he would be a guest in his manor today. Of course, the so-called guest was probably just looking around. Although Jiang Hai didn't know his pulse, if he wanted to see, Jiang Hai would not refuse. Of course, if he was interested in his manor, no matter who he was, Jiang Hai would slap him away. What a joke. That was something he would never sell. There was no one else. "Mr. Jiang Hai, you are here." When Jiang Hai arrived at the Caesar Palace, the person who saw him yesterday was already waiting for him at the door. When he saw Jiang Hai coming down, he quickly greeted him and said respectfully, "Didn't you say you were going to my place today? Where's Du Feynman?" After getting out of the car, Jiang Hai asked this person curiously. "Vroom vroom vroom." But before this person answered, Jiang Hai suddenly heard a deafening roar. Then, a silver-white light flashed from the underground parking lot of the Caesar Palace. In the next second, a rather avant-garde sports car with a metallic feel and personality appeared in front of him. The whole car was silver-white, and the whole car presented another kind of streamline. The front of the car was made into a W shape. In addition to the prominent driver's seat, There were 2 front tires on both sides of the car. There was only one driver's seat in the car. The driver's seat was made of transparent orange glass, and there was only one seat in the driver's seat. Du Feynman, whom Zhang Hai just asked, was sitting in this seat at this time. After arriving in front of Zhang Hai, he gently drifted and parked the car side by side beside Zhang Hai. Then he opened the car's, lid? Well, Zhang Hai didn't know how to describe it. It was like a car's skylight, but the whole driver's seat was made of glass, so when it was opened, the car instantly became a convertible. Hey Zhang Hai, you're too late. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feynman said with a smug face. Your timing is quite accurate. Knowing that I'm here, you deliberately came over to show off. Xueqi, to be honest, your car is really good. Looking at Du Feynman, Zhang Hai also smiled, then touched his chin. Looking at this car, it's really cool. This is Lamborghini's concept car, Lamborghini Egoista. This is Italian, which means selfish. This car has 600 horsepower and a 5.2 LV10 engine. In order to get this thing I spent a lot of effort, but fortunately, this thing is quite cool. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman also smiled and said. It was obvious that he was also very satisfied with this car. Xueqi, this car is really good, but there's no way to carry people? You've been driving this car by yourself. Walking around the car, Zhang Hai nodded. It was indeed very good. He heard that the Dubai tycoons were obsessed with Lamborghini, causing the people in China to like this car very much. In the past, Zhang Hai didn't like this big bull very much. Compared to bulls and horses, he preferred tridents and the like. But now, it seemed that this big bull was better than other sports cars for a reason. Hey, driving this car is my little baby. By the way, how's the road at your place? Is it okay to drive this car? Although he wanted to show off, Du Feynman still said happily. No problem, I flattened it. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai replied with a smile, then sat on his shield. Originally, the road in Winthrop wasn't very good. Of course, it wasn't too bad either. It was basically similar to the first-line roads in China. It was inevitable that there would be some bumps when driving, but ordinary cars would have no problem at all. Sports cars wouldn't have a big problem, but supercars would be more or less troublesome. However, since Zhang Hai was attacked, and Winthrop was expanded, Zhang Hai and the town jointly funded the repair of this road. Now the road in front of Zhang Hai's house was much smoother, and there would be no problem for anyone to drive on it. Seeing Zhang Hai start the engine and drive away, Du Feynman also stepped on the accelerator and followed Zhang Hai. After he left, 2 Rolls-Royces, which were the ones in Zhang Hai's house, followed closely behind. A nouveau riche was indeed a nouveau riche. He drove a supercar, and his bodyguards also drove an RV. He was really rich. Because Du Feynman was in the front this time, and he also paid the fine for Zhang Hai for speeding along the way, Zhang Hai drove very fast. His shield naturally couldn't be compared to a supercar. Compared to an ordinary sports car, his shield was much slower. After all, this car was bulletproof. With such a thick steel plate on the car, how could it run so fast? So even if he ran as fast as he couldn't reach 200 kilometers per hour. But it wasn't a problem to maintain 150 or 60 kilometers per hour. It took Zhang Hai nearly a day to drive here, but it only took him more than 5 hours to go back. At around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he had already arrived at the airport in Boston. In about half an hour, he could go home. He deliberately called home at this time. After all, Du Feynman was a member of the royal family. It was impossible for him to not eat a meal when he came here. And his bodyguards, it was impossible for Zhang Hai to let them starve, right? At this time, preparing lunch was the best choice. After Zhang Hai called, Xueqi came out of the room and began to prepare a rich lunch. Daliana, Marion, and Bernice were there to help. While they were preparing, Zhang Hai and the others had unknowingly arrived in front of his manor. However, when Zhang Hai drove to the front of the manor, he was stunned for a moment. It was because he didn't know when, but there were a lot of people standing outside the gate of his manor. Looking at these people who had the same skin color as him, Zhang Hai was a little puzzled. Du Feynman was even more puzzled. He stopped the car far away. His identity made him have to be careful. The 2 Rolls-Royces behind him also stopped there. Seeing Du Feynman stop, Jiang Hai drove to the front of the gate. Looking at these people in front of him, he was a little puzzled. These people weren't here before he left. What were they doing now? Were these people tourists? Are you also here to buy seafood? Go to the back and line up. There are people here who want to buy seafood. Seeing that Jiang Hai actually went directly to the gate, although many people here didn't recognize Jiang Hai's car logo, it didn't prevent them from knowing that this car was definitely valuable. It wasn't hard to imagine why a rich person would come here. Immediately, someone in the front of the line shouted at Jiang Hai. Chapter 522. Are you here to buy seafood? Hearing their words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then asked curiously. Of course, aren't you? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people here said confidently. As Winthrop became more and more popular, Jiang Hai's seafood was second to none in the eyes of all the tourists in Winthrop. Even in the eyes of the Americans, the price of the seafood Jiang Hai sold was acceptable. Of course, they weren't referring to the abalones, sea cucumbers, and the like. They didn't eat these things. They were referring to the lobsters. In Jiang Hai's manner, a 30-pound lobster was only sold for $3,000. Generally, the price of $3,000 could be bought from fishing companies, but they couldn't buy it so cheaply. Basically, such a heavy lobster was sold for $3,600 to $4,000. Jiang Hai's lobster was sold for $3,000, and they could still afford it. It was precisely because of the addition of these locals that the tourists felt uncomfortable. Originally, Jiang Hai only sold the lobsters to them, and they didn't care very much. They thought that they were taking care of Jiang Hai's business. The quality of people was not the same. The lobster was sold for $100,000 in China, but it was sold for $18,000 here. They still felt that Jiang Hai was taking advantage of them. Gradually, some people began to nitpick. His was too big, his was too small, his meat was not too solid, the price was too expensive, and the things he matched were not to his liking, etc. There was no other way. There were all kinds of people in this world, so they either had to swallow their anger or fight back. Fortunately, this was Jiang Hai's character, and Edward Anderson also inherited his character. Edward Anderson also told Jiang Hai about these things. Jiang Hai's meaning was that this was the price, and it was up to them to buy it or not. In fact, after Jiang Hai's tough fight, some people did not buy it, but most people still bought it. Those who did not want to buy could only look at them angrily. Without their money, Jiang Hai would not go bankrupt. However, it was precisely because of these people that Jiang Hai and the others did not accept reservations. Every day, they would grab some and walk around the city. If someone wanted to buy it, they would sell it. If no one wanted to buy it, they would take it back to eat it. Anyway, they did not lack these things. Moreover, Jiang Hai liked to eat it very much. They were not afraid of these things being left behind. But this time, there were foreigners who came to buy it. Many tourists panicked. This was because Edward Anderson's team could only catch a limited number of lobsters every day. Even if they got up early in the morning to catch lobsters, Edward Anderson's team only had 5 people in total. Among them, Marlon Rupert had to fly the plane to patrol, so there were only 4 people left. These 4 people mainly had to monitor the growth of the fish. Excluding lunch and rest time, they only had about 1 hour a day. About 2 hours were used to catch lobsters. How much could they catch? If they caught it casually, it would be a lot. However, it would take some time to find lobsters that were more than 15 kilograms. The number of lobsters they caught every day was about 10. Originally, it was only for tourists. There would even be leftovers. However, now that the local and American tourists came to buy it, the Huaxia tourists did not have enough to eat. If it was just lobsters, it would be fine. The problem was that abalones, sea cucumbers, Arctic shrimps, shellfish, and so on were all caught by Edward Anderson's team. The number was also limited. Jiang Hai's team, the seller's market, was not anxious, but the buyer's market was going crazy. It was precisely because of this that on the second day after Jiang Hai left, there were already some foodies waiting at Jiang Hai's place. At present, it was already the 3rd day they waited here. When they saw Jiang Hai's car suddenly drive over, these people had some common enemies. Oh, then wait for a while. It will probably take some time for them to get the seafood out. I have to go in first. This is my home. Seeing that these people were here to take care of his business, Zhang Hai nodded and said to these people. Then, under these people's disbelieving gazes, Zhang Hai opened the door and motioned for Du Feimin's team to go in. They did not recognize Zhang Hai's car, but they recognized the Rolls-Royce and the strange-looking sports car in front. Although it looked strange, they also knew that a sports car like this was definitely not cheap. Hey brother, can we go in and take a look? After seeing the motorcade go in, Zhang Hai's car was also about to go in. At this time, the person in the first row immediately waved his hand and said to Zhang Hai. He was indeed a tourist. Now, the legend of Zhang Hai was being spread everywhere in Winthrop. He was a little confused and did not pay attention. Now, it seemed that the person in front of him was the legendary Zhang Hai. He had heard that Zhang Hai had a lot of good things here. The priceless beef, the golden sea stall, the only forest nearby, and the seabed full of coral reefs and fish. In the words of Winthrop people, Zhang Hai's place was simply a fairy tale world. However, this was a private manor and was not open to the public. They could not enter even if they wanted to. Now that they finally saw Zhang Hai, they had to ask him properly. They couldn't have not been to the best place. Not today, I have a guest. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai closed the door and drove into the manor. Seeing that Zhang Hai rejected his request, the person could not help but twitch his mouth. However, he did not speak. A few young people behind him had already walked away with jealousy. What's there to be arrogant about? He's just a country bumpkin. He can't survive in China, so he came to the United States to act like a big shot. We are his guests. Don't you know that guests are gods? He's so arrogant. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have bought his seafood. That's right. This guy is just a playboy. If he was in China, he wouldn't have survived more than 3 episodes. Tisk, how many people can he afford to offend people who can afford to eat his lobster? There are really all kinds of birds in the forest. Eating his lobster is already an honor for him, but he's still so arrogant. This manor will be gone sooner or later. Listening to the jealous words of the people behind, the person in front couldn't help but laugh. In fact, he was also a little jealous in his heart. After all, Zhang Hai was actually about the same age as them. However, Zhang Hai's style at this time was not something these people could compare to. Whether it was money, status, fame, or the friends he made, Zhang Hai's style was not something they could compare to. He was the closest just now, and he saw it the most clearly. The person driving the sports car, if there was no accident, should be the legendary Middle Eastern nouveau riche. He did have the capital to be arrogant. Moreover, Zhang Hai was not wrong. He didn't know them. Why would he let them into his private manor to play? If it were him, he wouldn't be willing either. Alright, you youngsters, you're too straightforward. Don't you know how much power this Zhang Hai has in the local area? If you whisper here later and are heard by others, I guess you will never be able to buy his seafood. If you don't want to eat, there is a car over there. You can go back directly. At this moment, a man in his 50s said in a low voice. Hearing this man's words, the people in the line became silent at once. Leave now. They were unwilling. Those who hadn't tasted Zhang Hai's seafood before were more confused and curious. They had never eaten it before, but they also wanted to try it. However, after tasting it, they would know what was called delicious in the world. Compared with the things in Zhang Hai's manor, everything else was rubbish. It didn't require too many complicated cooking methods to make the food they bought delicious. This was the reason why they came here. Sometimes people were really realistic. After hearing this middle-aged man's words, although these people secretly whispered a few words, none of them left. They were still waiting for Edward Anderson to appear. At this time, Zhang Hai didn't know about this. He had already arrived in front of his villa with Du Feimin. Although Du Feimin's bodyguards got out of the car, they didn't enter the villa. Only Zhang Hai and Du Feimin entered. When they walked in, the fragrance of the food had already entered their noses. Hey, Zhang Hai is back. This is Mr. Du Feimin Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum. My name is Bernice. I'm Zhang Hai's friend. Seeing Zhang Hai and Du Feimin walk in, Bernice, who was originally busy, came out with a plate of food. After putting it on the table, she introduced herself to Du Feimin. Wow, beautiful lady from the east. Nice to meet you. Since you are Zhang Hai's friend, then you are also my friend. My friends all call me Du Feimin. You can also call me by this name. Of course, if you call me by my full name, I won't mind. Haha. After hearing Bernice's introduction, Du Feimin glanced at Zhang Hai and gave him a look of admiration. His meaning was very clear. He didn't expect Zhang Hai to be hiding a beauty in his golden house. A young man and a young woman living in a villa. They weren't related by blood, and there were no obstacles between them. If you said that they had a pure relationship, regardless of whether others believed it or not, Du Feimin definitely wouldn't believe it. However, this time, Du Feimin had to believe it even if he didn't want to, because Zhang Hai and Bernice really didn't have that kind of relationship. You're back. Quickly sit down. There's still a fish left. The steak is ready. At this time, Xueqi also came out of the kitchen with a pot of braised sirloin. After seeing Zhang Hai and the other two, she smiled and said. When Du Feimin smelled the smell of the pot of beef, his eyes suddenly narrowed. Looking at the pot of beef, he would never forget it. This beef was the kind of beef he had eaten when he was in the Qi family. He didn't expect that Zhang Hai really had this kind of beef here. If this was the case, then his second goal might be achieved soon. Chapter 523. Oh my god, this is the best beef I've ever eaten. Oh, is this cod? Oh my god, is this cod? Is this mutton? Haha, Zhang, if you're hiding something. This lobster is amazing both in size and taste. Looking at the table full of delicacies in front of him, Du Feimin really couldn't stop eating with his fork. He kept putting pieces of meat into his mouth, and he didn't even put down his thumb. If he wasn't gesturing to Xueqi, then he was gesturing to Zhang Hai. Looking at him, De Lian and the others were also very happy. These things belonged to their family, so they were naturally very happy when Du Feimin praised them like this. As the head chef today, Xueqi's face also showed a trace of a smile, because a guest like Du Feimin was naturally a chef's favorite. Moreover, to be honest, she also knew that her cooking skills weren't bad. Today, in order to entertain Du Feimin, Zhang Hai had prepared a lot of delicious food, and beef was naturally the main dish today. There were 3 types of beef, 2 Huaxia style, and 1 Western style. The Western style was naturally the steak, which was needless to say. After Zhang Hai's beef was fried, there was no need to pour any sauce, just sprinkle some pepper and basil leaves on it, and the taste would come out directly. It was so delicious that it made people's hair stand on end. Black pepper sauce and the like were equally delicious, but it would destroy the original taste of the beef. Taking a bite would be like biting a piece of nature, and if sauce was used, it would only be delicious, but it wouldn't have the original taste. However, after Xueqi's research, she found that there were a few dishes in Huaxia that could infinitely amplify the natural taste of this kind of beef. One of them was stewed beef brisket. Of course, this wasn't an ordinary stewed beef brisket. Instead, red wine was added to it, which meant that it was an improved version of Burgundy red wine stewed beef. Using red wine instead of water and smearing honey on the meat, the stewed beef had a natural red wine aroma and a slight sweetness of honey. At the same time, the red wine was added, especially the red wine from Zhang Hai's manor, which had a rich and pure taste, so there was no need to add ketchup. Only these things needed to be placed properly, some orange peel and spices were added, and the stewed beef not only had a natural taste, but also had a slight taste, so it naturally tasted better. The other dish was beef, which was the most simple home-cooked dish, stir-fried beef slices. It used onions from Zhang Hai, as well as some xiran and sesame seeds. When frying, one must pay attention to the heat. One must use the heat of the pot to quickly fry the meat, but one must not use the power of the fire to cook the meat. Only Xueqi knew how to cook the meat. According to the Westerners, these 3 beef dishes were today's main dishes. Of course, these were not the only ones that could be the main dishes. For example, the braised codfish. This codfish was a real Atlantic codfish, although Zhang Hai didn't breed it. However, there were a lot of codfish in the Atlantic Ocean, and the seaweed in Zhang Hai's sea area had a special ability. If ordinary fish swam here, they wouldn't be willing to leave, and it was the same for codfish. In addition to the codfish, there was also the grouper raised by Zhang Hai. This grouper was originally raised by Zhang Hai, and was caught by Edward Anderson. They didn't catch it to kill the fish, but to check the growth of the fish regularly. Usually, after catching the fish with fake bait, they would release the fish. However, this fish was obviously a little greedy, and swallowed it deep. Its intestines were scraped, and it couldn't survive even if it was released. Therefore, it was sent to Zhonghai as an extra dish. Therefore, although this grouper was raised by Zhonghai for half a year, and its size wasn't small, it wasn't too big either. It was enough to be sold, but it wasn't at the level that Zhonghai wanted. Therefore, it was considered a small fry, and it wasn't considered a main dish for Zhonghai. In addition to the fish and beef, Zhonghai also got a big lobster. This Boston lobster was 20 kilograms, and if it was sold to a fishing company, it would be worth at least $5,000. However, Zhonghai killed it for the big boss who gave him $2 billion in oil futures. Of course, there were many lobsters of this size in his farm, and this wasn't the only one. Otherwise, why would Zhonghai be so generous? He was actually a very stingy person. And most importantly, he caught more than one lobster. The bodyguards outside were also eating big lobsters. Although they weren't as big as Zhonghai's, they were still about 15 kilograms. They were definitely big guys. Du Feynman didn't eat abalones and sea cucumbers. As for shark fins, Zhonghai wouldn't deliberately hunt these guys. The longer he stayed at the seaside, the more he felt for these marine creatures. If it wasn't necessary, he wouldn't take the initiative to kill them. The Yangtze River grenadier fish and Chinese bahaba fish had only been raised for more than a month, and it wasn't time to eat them yet. Naturally, Zhonghai would bring them to the table. Therefore, in addition to these things, the other dishes on the table were the mutton and some vegetables that Zhonghai brought back from China. The Ujimkin sheep was originally a very good breed of sheep. After eating Zhonghai's pasture for a month, the quality of the meat was even better. The small hot pot and roasted lamb chops made from its meat made Du Feynman very happy. Zhonghai and the others enjoyed the meal, and Du Feynman was also very happy. In fact, as a rich man, he had eaten all kinds of delicious food in his life. The culinary skills of those chefs were much better than Xiao Yu's. He could tell that Xiao Yu's culinary skills were good, but compared to the national chefs, it would be considered good if she could give 65 out of 100 points. After all, she was still young. She had talent, but talent hadn't been exchanged for strength yet. But the dishes she made use of the raw power of the dishes to raise the quality of the dishes. This made him value Zhonghai's ingredients even more. This also confirmed the voice in his heart. After a harmonious dinner, Du Feynman smiled and said to Zhonghai, "Zhong, there's a saying in Huaxia, walk 100 steps after a meal and you'll live to 99. Since we're done eating, shouldn't we go out for a walk?" Shaking his head, Zhonghai said to Du Feynman, "No, you missed it. There's a saying in our country, walk 100 steps after a meal and you'll live to 99. Lie on the bed after a meal and you'll live to 208. Lie on the bed and you'll sleep and you'll live to 1,000 years old." Some people like to go out for a walk after dinner. This was considered to be digesting food and losing weight. However, Zhonghai was actually a very lazy person. He insisted on running every day because of the habit he left behind in the past. In order to make his body not appear too abrupt, he was usually a very lazy person. "Hey brother, I don't want to live to 1,000 years old. That's too boring. So, as the host, aren't you going to accompany your guest for a walk?" Shrugging helplessly, Du Feynman said to Zhonghai. It seemed like he had made up his mind to say it. "All right then." Zhonghai looked at him and nodded. Then, he stood up and followed him along the river to the beach. Of course, when they saw Du Feynman coming out, the bodyguards outside his door also gathered instantly. 10 people followed Du Feynman and Zhonghai from a distance. They were sure that they couldn't hear the conversation between Du Feynman and Zhonghai, but they could also rush to their side in a few seconds. This was how the most professional bodyguards did things. If you have something to say, just say it. After walking for about 5 minutes, Zhonghai looked at the group of people behind him and said to Du Feynman with a chuckle. He didn't believe that this Middle Eastern nouveau riche would only come over to chat with him. "Heh, I don't know if you still remember what I said to you at Caesar's palace last night." Hearing Zhonghai speak so straightforwardly, Du Feynman didn't beat around the bush and directly said to Zhonghai, "Which sentence?" Hearing his words, Zhonghai looked at him with some confusion. When he said this, Du Feynman was stunned. Cough. You asked me why I wanted to use 1 billion to buy your 900 million worth of jewelry. I said it was one of the reasons, but I didn't say the other one. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin glanced at Zhang Hai and said to him seriously, "Oh, then tell me." Hearing him say so, Zhang Hai smiled brightly and asked, "Oh, then go ahead." First of all, the reason I bought your jewelry is indeed to build a boat. That 100 million is actually to express my goodwill to you. Of course, second of all, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, this 100 million is yours. I won't take it back. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin first stated a premise. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai nodded. If you want it back, I'll calculate it for you. Second, we want your beef. No, to be exact, we want your cow. I know how precious your cow is. We'll spend money to buy it, but I hope it's a live one. Sure enough, after he finished speaking, Du Feimin revealed his true intentions. Zhang Hai knew that these Middle Eastern nouveau riches wouldn't do anything that would cause them to lose money. Originally, he was still thinking, what exactly did these guys see in him? They saw his cow, but they weren't going to rob it, they were going to buy it. Hey, Du Feimin, I might have to disappoint you this time. Shaking his head, Zhang Hai looked at Du Feimin and laughed. Is the price not right? Or are you not going to sell it? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin looked at him with some confusion and asked, Don't ask me for the secret recipe, because I don't know the secret recipe either. I'm only telling you because I think you're a friend. I hired a research team at Boston University to study my cattle, but they couldn't find anything. The next generation they bred was just ordinary Angus cattle, and the cattle that left here will slowly degenerate back to their original state. Most importantly, there were cattle here 10 years ago, but the cattle were just ordinary cattle. You can buy cattle if you want, but you can choose any of the cattle here. I know you have the ability to go through customs, but once you go through customs, it'll just be an ordinary cow. Chapter 524. Looking at Du Feimin, Zhang Hai smiled and talked about the situation in his manner. Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but be stunned. What's going on? Seeing that Zhang Hai didn't seem to be lying, Du Feimin couldn't help but ponder. Indeed, his main reason for pleasing Zhang Hai was to bring in Zhang Hai's cows. He was a member of the royal family. His heart had always served the royal family of Dubai. Zhang Hai's cows were a money-making ground. If they could really be cultivated successfully, it would be a huge profit. An ordinary cow was sold for $5,000, while Zhang Hai's cows were sold for $150,000. A 30-fold difference was not a joke. Zhang Hai's land was limited. At most, he could raise tens of thousands of cows. But if the royal family of Dubai invested in artificial pastures, how many cows could they raise? 100,000? 500,000? 1 million? If 1 million cows could be raised in a year, how much would it be worth? 150 billion. With this sum of money, Dubai's losses and the recession in tourism would be nothing. But now, Zhang Hai's words extinguished the little flame in his heart. Du Feimin looked at Zhang Hai, wondering if Zhang Hai was bluffing him. However, he could see that Zhang Hai was telling the truth. This pasture, the cows here, and Zhang Hai here. It was a triangular ring. The cattle couldn't leave this place, and Zhang Hai couldn't leave this place. Only with Zhang Hai, the grassland, and the cattle here could such a miraculous breed of cattle appear. Therefore, when he heard Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin hesitated. If you don't believe me, then you can take a few. Seeing that Du Feimin was still hesitating, Zhang Hai smiled and said to him. He really didn't care because he knew that these people wouldn't be able to research anything. Just like the research team in Boston, that research team had been researching for a long time. In the beginning, when the cows were brought over, they were like Zhang Hai's cows. Marble veins were almost all over their bodies. The cows were abnormally strong, and their fur was smooth and soft. It could be said that they were the best breed of cattle. But after a month, the cows were beaten back to their original form. Although they were still strong, they were at most very strong ordinary Angus cows. These cows were not directly infused with spiritual qi by Zhang Hai. After eating the grass here, the spiritual qi produced by the grass entered their bodies and was stored there. Therefore they were not like Little Yellow, Little White, and Big Fool, who had the opportunity to evolve. The spiritual chi that was not directly infused with spiritual chi would run away with the passage of time. Therefore, after being slaughtered, there were still marble veins, but they had already returned to the most normal state, about 5%. In that case, the cow wouldn't be able to sell for 150,000 yuan. It would be good if it could be sold for 20,000 yuan. Although they were more expensive than ordinary cows, these cows were not worth the exclamations. After that, Zhang Hai also tested the soil and grass. When these things were brought to the laboratory, they indeed contained a lot of spiritual energy. But these things were not as good as the cows. After leaving Zhang Hai's land, the spiritual energy had disappeared in 3 days. The grass was just a relatively healthy pasture, and the soil was just a relatively fertile soil. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Hai did not care if Du Feimin took these cows away. Not to mention Du Feimin, even if the US government came, he would not care. This was because the real cause of the mutation of these things was not the natural world, but him, Zhang Hai. As long as he was here, his cows would be the best. If he was not here, this would be an ordinary money-losing pasture. If this is really the case, then it's a pity. I originally thought that this was something that would benefit mankind. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin said with a sigh. Zhang Hai also shrugged. He had already seen Du Feimin's shamelessness a long time ago. Benefit mankind? More like benefit the royal family of Dubai. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin finally hesitated and said seriously, "But even so, I still want to study your cows. How about this? 1 cow for $1.5 million. I'll buy 30 of them. What do you think?" The price of buying breeding cows was more expensive than ordinary beef cows. This was common sense, not to mention that he wanted live cows. You can deal with the customs at the customs. You'll be in charge of settling the customs. It has nothing to do with me. You can also choose any cattle you like. Take whichever one you like. I don't want 1.5 million. You've given me a discount of 100 million on the gemstones, so I can't be too greedy. How about 1 million? 30 cows. Your people will be in charge of the transportation and so on. When the time comes, you'll know that it's not the cattle that are magical. Zhang Hai shrugged and said seriously. Seeing how straightforward Zhang Hai was, Du Feimin also sighed. If this was really the case, then he would be depressed if he could not earn this large sum of money. However, he was still pleased with Zhang Hai's attitude. He transferred $30 million to Zhang Hai on the spot. This was the price of 30 cows. Then, he called people in Dubai and asked them to tackle the problem of the US government and customs. No matter what it was, as long as it involved the country, it was very easy to solve. For example, the giant pandas that Hua Xia sent everywhere. If it was an ordinary person, even if it was a government official, it was absolutely impossible to send this thing out of the country. It was a national treasure. If someone dared to be arrogant, then their entire family would be killed by the government. But if it escalated to the level of the country, then it was much easier. After Du Feimin made the call, the people in Dubai had already started to move. They contacted the ship and the US government. Of course, these things had nothing to do with Zhang Hai. This is my mission. If the cows return to the country, then it has nothing to do with me. But I don't think you'll lie to me. If these cows return to the country and become ordinary cows, then our plan is officially ruined. Phew, but to be honest, your ingredients are very good, very good. I want to talk to you about another business. After about 10 minutes, Du Feimin finished the call and helplessly let out a long sigh, then said to Zhang Hai with a smile. What business? Zhang Hai didn't care about the 30 million he earned. Having money was better than not having money. Now that he heard that Du Feimin wanted to do business, he couldn't help but look at him with some doubts. What else does he want? Food for the royal family. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin said seriously. Hearing his words, Zhang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. I think you're right. This is a free advertisement for you. Of course, it's mainly because the ingredients here are really good. To be honest, Miss Ye's culinary skills are very good, but compared to the top chefs, it's still a lot worse. But she actually used the power of the ingredients to push the food itself to the extreme. You should know that we, the children of the royal family, are very particular about eating. So I need you to provide us with fresh meat. I'm very interested in your beef, mutton, fish, lobster, and shellfish. I can use your retail price to increase by 5% to purchase your ingredients. We'll be responsible for transportation and the like. After all, there are plenty of empty planes in Dubai. But you have to ensure our consumption. Of course, our consumption won't be too much. After all, it's only the royal family of Dubai. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feimin said seriously. That's not a problem. But how much do you need? You have to tell me, so I can have an estimate in my heart. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Zhang Hai smiled. He was very interested in selling things. He didn't care who he sold these things to, nor did he care about the square. However, if there was such a free super advertisement, then Zhang Hai's seafood and the like could be sold at a high price. This was also what he was most interested in. Thinking about it, when his beef was sold in the future, it could be labeled as exclusive to the royal family of Dubai. The 13 slots would instantly fill up. Most importantly, Dubai was a kingdom of the UAE. The kingdoms of the UAE all wore the same pants. At that time, it was very likely that the beef would change from exclusive to the royal family of Dubai to exclusive to the royal family of the UAE. The meaning would be completely different. There are a total of 713 people in the royal family of Dubai. Including their wives, there are less than 5,000 people. According to the daily consumption of 2 kilograms of beef and 1 kilogram of fish per person, if there are no banquets, the annual consumption is about 3.65 million kilograms of beef and 1.8 million kilograms of fish. However, you also know that we like to hold banquets and the like, so this number will increase a little. The annual consumption of beef is about 5 million kilograms and 3 million kilograms of fish. After a rough calculation, Du Feimin said to Zhang Hai. However, when he heard his words, Zhang Hai secretly cried out in his heart. An Angus bull was about 750 kilograms. The slaughter rate was 60%, which meant that 450 kilograms of meat could be sliced from one bull. The royal family of Dubai would definitely not eat the inferior meat, so they could only eat the best, which was about 200 kilograms. 5 million kilograms meant 25,000 cows. Well, Zhang Hai didn't need to do anything else. He just needed to focus on raising cows next year. 3 million kilograms of fish, which was 3,000 tons. This amount wasn't too big, but the amount of cows, it was really not small. Fish is not a problem. Around March next year, when I start fishing here, I can provide it. However, the beef is somewhat lacking. Zhang Hai thought for a moment and said to Du Feimin. Originally, he had only planned to raise 25,000 cows this year. Among them, more than 10,000 were cows, and the remaining 15,000 were bulls that he wanted to buy. If these cows were all given to Du Feimin, then how could there be any seeds in Zhang Hai's manor? Most importantly, he had already agreed to give Walton, Qi Li, and Zhang De the same amount as this year, which was 10,000 cows. Of course, he believed that if he said a word, no matter which of the 3 people, no matter which one, would buy the remaining 5,000 cows. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about selling his cows. Now, even if Du Feimin raised the price by 5%, Zhang Hai was unlikely to sell all the beef to him. If a person only looked at money and didn't care about sincerity, then this person was not far from failure. Chapter 525. That's really a pity. Hearing that Zhang Hai could only squeeze out 5,000 cows a year, Du Feimin couldn't help but sigh. If that was the case, it would be a very troublesome matter. Actually, I have another way. Looking at Du Feimin's appearance, to be honest, when there was business knocking on the door, Zhang Hai really couldn't refuse these green dollar bills, so he prepared another method. Another way? Hearing Zhang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but look at Zhang Hai. Indeed, my beef can be said to be the best beef in the world. If you want me to give all of it to the Dubai royal family, my beef is definitely not enough, but we can cooperate. Looking at Du Feimin, Zhang Hai said seriously. What kind of cooperation? Hearing Zhang Hai talk about cooperation, Du Feimin became interested. If you buy meat directly, the meat is definitely not enough, so you can raise some cows, and then I can provide you with pasture. Looking at Du Feimin, Zhang Hai also said seriously. In fact, His proposal was very simple. If he used his ranch to raise cows, he could supply them. But the problem was that Zhang Hai was not willing to become a contract worker for the Dubai royal family, although he could earn a lot of money. However, if the royal family of Dubai raised their own cattle and he provided them with pasture, it would be different. Although the pasture would lose some of its aura during transportation, it was still more nutritious than ordinary pasture. Zhang Hai was confident that with these pasture, the royal family of Dubai would be able to raise beef with marbled veins. Of course, it would be impossible for the beef to be bigger than Zhang Hai's. Basically, every one of them would have some, but the amount of marbled veins would be about 3% to 5%. An Angus bull, if fed well, could grow to 750 kilograms. 60% of the slaughter rate would be 450 kilograms. 5% of the slaughter rate would be 22.5 kilograms. 10,000 Angus bulls would be 225,000 kilograms. The best beef produced from 200,000 Angus bulls would be enough to supply the royal family of Dubai. Most importantly, they could still sell the leftover beef. This was a good business. Although there was no way to get Zhang Hai's beef, it would be good if they could get such beef. Thinking of Zhang Hai's words, Du Feynman couldn't help but ponder. Indeed, this was a solution, but he was a person recommended by the Dubai royal family. He didn't seek cooperation with Zhang Hai to satisfy his desire for food. He wanted to find a way to make money for the Dubai royal family. However, if they really did as Zhang Hai said, then the one who would benefit in the end wouldn't be their imperial family. Their imperial family was more like a wedding dress for Zhang Hai. And the one who would benefit directly, needless to say, was Zhang Hai. Because his meat could continue to be sold, the pasture could also continue to be sold. This manor was really expensive. Then the price of the pasture. Du Feynman hesitated. Although the biggest beneficiary was Zhang Hai, after all, Dubai was a country with rich people. The heritage of a country was obviously not comparable to Zhang Hai's manor. Raising 200,000 cows could guarantee the royal family's meat consumption. The rest of the beef could be sold to the people or transported abroad. 90,000 tons of beef could indeed make them a part of the money. The most important thing was that Dubai was not small. Although most of the land was desert, they could transform it. If 200,000 cows were not enough, what about 400,000? Or 1,000,000? They had the ability to raise more cows, but it would depend on whether Zhang Hai's pasture could supply them. If it was 1,000,000 cows, even if they could not sell one for $150,000, it would not be a problem to sell one for $20,000. That would be a price of $20 billion. After deducting the cost of labor, cattle breeding, and so on, they could make at least $10 billion. The site was Dubai's, so there was naturally no need to think too much about it. If he could provide his country with $10 billion in income, he could be considered a national hero. The only problem now was how much pasture Zhang Hai could supply, and what was the price? How about this? I'll give you two proposals. First, I don't need to pay for the pasture. I can even pay for the planes to transport it, but I want 15% of the cattle raised with the pasture. That is to say, you will provide the cattle breeding and manpower, and I will provide the pasture, so I will take 15%. Second, I will charge you $1,000 per ton of grass. I don't care about the rest. Looking at Du Feynman, Zhang Hai thought for a moment, then said a bit like a lion opening its mouth. They were talking business, so asking for a sky-high price and asking for a low price. Moreover, the price that Zhang Hai asked for, was indeed a little high. First, he wanted to take 15% of the total sales of the beef cattle. This was daylight robbery. Although he couldn't do it without his pasture, the other party would certainly not agree. Second, a ton of grass for $1,000, which was equivalent to $1 per kilogram. What kind of grass was almost as expensive as low-quality beef? This was also a price that was impossible to accept. When raising cattle, an average cow would eat 10 kilograms of grass every day, excluding the fattening period. If Dubai wanted to raise 1,000,000 cows, it would consume 10,000 tons of grass every day. Zhang Hai could provide that. This was because the pasture here grew very fast. If it weren't for the fact that the pasture he planted was not the type that was particularly tall, there would not be any other buildings in the manor. There was grass everywhere. Therefore, he did not care about the grass, but Du Feynman would not agree to this price no matter what. A day of pasture cost $10 million, 365 days a year, that was $365 billion. What a joke. They only earned around $10 billion in total. Now, they had to give Zhang Hai $365 billion? No matter how stupid they were, they would not give Zhang Hai that much money. Therefore, this was a sky-high price. Du Feynman did not care when he heard Zhang Hai's price and continued. Looking at Zhang Hai, Du Feynman said seriously, "Zhang, neither of these two conditions is possible. We can spend money to buy the grass, but it has to be reduced by 20 times. $50 per ton. That's not bad. You can easily earn $182.5 million a year. We don't need you to buy a plane. Prepare the pasture every day, and we can transport it ourselves." He directly rejected the first condition. What a joke. That was the ranch of Dubai's royal family. They did not even have enough shares. Therefore, even if it was only 1%, they would never give Zhang Hai a share. Therefore, they could only buy the second condition. 50 is really too little. If you cut it 20 times, I can't stand it. How about this, $800 per ton? Hearing that Du Feynman did not immediately turn around and leave, Zhang Hai also knew that it was time to lower the price. However, after they had tasted the sweetness of raising cattle for the first year, whether or not Zhang Hai would raise the price would depend on his mood. Shaking his head, Du Feynman also said seriously, $800 is also impossible. 80 is more like it. $80 per ton. According to their calculations, that was more than $200 million. They also felt the pinch. How about this? The final price is $150 per ton. I won't talk about negotiating skills with you. Let's talk about empty words. I can guarantee that the pasture I have here will have an effect that you can't imagine. Seeing that Du Feynman was not in a hurry at all and was increasing the price bit by bit, Zhang Hai shook his head. Sure enough, these old foxes would not act until they saw the hare. Zhang Hai was indeed not cut out for business. If Qi Li or Prawalton were here, they would just grind and see who was in a hurry. In any case, Zhang Hai and the others were definitely not the ones in a hurry. The final price would definitely not be low, but Zhang Hai could not do that. He would just wait for the business to start. $150. Deal. Du Feynman calculated in his heart. If a kilogram was calculated at $150, then 365 million tons a year would be around $547.5 million. Although it was still a lot, who told Zhang Hai to be the only one with the biggest profits. Compared to the price mentioned at the beginning and the shares that Zhang Hai wanted, this price was already within their acceptable range. Of course, they would not be so stupid and naive as to keep importing Zhang Hai's pasture. One could imagine that when Zhang Hai's pasture entered Dubai, they would definitely study the magic of the pasture and see if they could grow it in Dubai. However, Zhang Hai did not care. They could do whatever they wanted. He was still quite confident in his own things. Unless they could also pick up a Dragon Ball and use its blood to irrigate the pasture, they would not be able to study it. In this way, the two men, each with their own thoughts, quickly finalized the procedures for importing the pasture. Zhang Hai would provide Du Feynman and the others with the feed needed for 1 million cows. But at the same time, he also reserved 2,000 of the 15,000 cows that Zhang Hai could sell next year. After all, even the cows raised with Zhang Hai's pasture could not be compared with the cows here at Zhang Hai's place. The world's best cow was only found here in Zhang Hai's manor. The royal family's collateral branches only needed to eat some domestic cows, but the royal family's legitimate descendants needed to eat the best, such as the cows in Zhang Hai's manor. In addition, Zhang Hai's fish was also needed by the Dubai royal family. Of course, there was no way to set a price for the fish. The price would depend on the quality and quantity after the harvest, but Zhang Hai believed that his fish would definitely not be worse than the cows. In this way, while the two men were strolling around, they unknowingly finalized a project of $900 million. In addition, the price of the fish had not yet been set. If they waited until next year, Zhang Hai might be able to squeeze out $20 to $30 of income from the Dubai royal family. When money reached a certain point, it was really just a string of numbers such as the current situation. After the two of them finalized the main intention of the contract, the two of them called their respective lawyers. The following matters would be left to the lawyers to handle. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly flashed in front of them. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.